Nero Wolfe and the Kings of Keller Block. It was a Friday in October, just past 9 o'clock, when the trouble arrived at the old brownstone on West 35th Street. I was in the office going over the checkbook, a dreary exercise that Wolfe insisted be done weekly, as if watching money disappear on paper made it hurt less, when the first sign of disturbance came from the front hall. Caesar, all 95 pounds of Black Doberman authority, rose from his position near the door and issued a low rumbling alert that brought Mars to his feet immediately. Within 2 seconds, Apollo had materialized from the alcove near the stairs, Diana had abandoned her spot by the radiator, and Minerva had lifted her elegant head from the red leather chair she'd claimed an hour earlier. Only Loyal, the brick-red pit bull who Fritz had been spoiling in the kitchen, hadn't yet joined the committee, but I could hear his claws clicking rapidly across the hall tiles. All 6 dogs were now stationed in a loose semicircle facing the front door, not barking. Wolfe had trained them better than that, but radiating the kind of focused attention that precedes violence. Their posture said what words couldn't. Someone was outside, someone wrong. I closed the checkbook and reached for the Marley 38 in my desk drawer. Not because I'm jumpy, but because when 5 Dobermans and a pit bull agree that something's off, you listen. The bell rang. Not the usual ring. One firm press, the kind a client or a delivery boy would make. This was 3 quick jabs, a pause, then 2 more, a pattern, a signal, maybe, or just the panicked rhythm of someone who needed the door to open, now. I crossed to the hall and checked the peephole. Fritz had installed it at Wolfe's insistence after an incident 3 years back involving a process server with a grudge and a remarkable talent for lying. The brownstone security had been upgraded considerably since then. Bulletproof windows that cost more than my annual salary, reinforced locks that would give a tank second thoughts, and a series of buzzer systems that made Fort Knox look trusting. Through the peephole's wide-angle lens, I saw a man. He was young, maybe 25, and scared. His face was pale under the streetlight. His eyes were darting left and right, and his right hand was pressed against his side in a way that suggested he was either in pain or trying to hold something in. His clothes were decent, pressed slacks, a grey overcoat that had seen better days, and shoes that wanted a polish but hadn't been cheap to begin with. What made me hesitate was the blood. Not much, just a dark stain seeping between his fingers where they pressed against his ribs. Not enough to make him keel over, but enough to make 3 quick jabs at a doorbell seem reasonable. Behind me, Caesar made a sound deep in his chest. Not quite a growl, more like a question. "I know," I said quietly. "Wrong smell." The dogs had been part of the household for 2 years now, and they'd developed instincts about the brownstone's visitors that bordered on supernatural. They knew the postman, tolerated the grocery deliveries, accepted Inspector Kramer with wary recognition, and treated Saul Panzer like visiting royalty. But strangers who arrived bleeding and desperate? That put them on alert. I kept the chain on and opened the door 3 inches. "Help you." The man's eyes locked onto mine with the intensity of a drowning swimmer spotting a life preserver. "Archie Goodwin." "Depends who's asking." "My name is..." He winced and his hand pressed harder against his side. "My name is Dennis Halbert. I need to see Nero Wolfe. It's about the Kings." "What Kings?" "The Kings of Keller Block." I didn't move. Behind me I heard the faint creak of Wolfe's chair in the office. He'd been listening from his desk, where he'd been reading a book on the cultivation of Cypripedium orchids, with the same focused intensity most men reserve for treasure maps. If Wolfe was bothering to shift his 1/7 of a ton, the situation had his attention. "Never heard of them," I said. "Yes, you have." Dennis Halbert's voice was steady despite the pain. "Everyone in Hell's Kitchen has heard of them. Everyone in Manhattan has heard of them, even if they pretend otherwise. They own 6 blocks. They control the docks. They decide who works, who doesn't, who lives," he paused, swallowing, "and who dies." Sounds like a police matter. The police can't help me. Half of them are on the King's payroll. The other half are too scared to do anything about it. His eyes were desperate now. "I have information about a murder, about 5 murders, about a conspiracy that goes all the way to..." He stopped, not because he'd changed his mind, but because he'd run out of air. His face went white, and he sagged against the doorframe. I made a decision, possibly a stupid one, but the kind Wolfe paid me to make when he wasn't around to countermand it. "Caesar back," I said firmly. The big Doberman retreated 2 paces, and the others followed his lead. I slid the chain off, pulled the door open, and caught Dennis Halbert before he could collapse onto the stoop. He wasn't heavy, maybe 160 soaking wet, and I got him inside without much trouble. The dogs maintained their distance, watchful but controlled. Loyal, smallest of the pack at 45 pounds, but possessing a jaw that could crack walnuts, circled around to sniff at the visitor's shoes, then looked up at me with an expression that clearly said, "This one's trouble." "Fritz," I called toward the kitchen. "Medical supplies, now." Then I half-carried, half-dragged Mr. Dennis Halbert toward the office, where Nero Wolfe was going to be absolutely delighted to have his evening interrupted by a bleeding stranger babbling about street gangs. Wolfe looked up from his book as I maneuvered Halbert through the doorway. His expression didn't change, it rarely did, but I'd worked for him long enough to read the microscopic signs of displeasure, the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his massive hand paused mid-turn of the page, the infinitesimal shift in his posture that suggested he was already planning his refusal. "Archie." His voice was a deep rumble, like distant thunder. "What is that?" "This is Dennis Halbert. He's bleeding on our floor and talking about the Kings of Keller Block. I thought you'd want to hear what he has to say before he passes out or dies, whichever comes first. I would prefer neither occur in my office." Too late for the first one. I deposited Halbert in the red leather chair, not the good one, the client chair, and noted with some relief that the bleeding seemed to have slowed. The second one still negotiable. Fritz appeared in the doorway, carrying the first aid kit we kept in the kitchen. Behind him the dogs had formed a loose perimeter, with Caesar and Mars nearest the office door, the others spread strategically throughout the hall. They'd done this before, not often, but enough times that they knew the drill. Wolfe didn't allow chaos in his brownstone, and that included canine chaos. Dennis Halbert opened his eyes and focused on Wolfe with the kind of awe usually reserved for monuments or miracles. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you. I have done nothing yet." Wolfe's tone was glacial. "Archie has demonstrated his usual impetuosity in admitting you. I have not agreed to hear your story, retain your case, or invest even a moment's attention in whatever melodrama has prompted you to bleed in my office. Someone tried to kill me. People make that attempt with distressing frequency. It is rarely my concern. They tried to kill me because I know who murdered Vincent Ramirez." Wolfe's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Continue." I peeled back Halbert's jacket while he talked. The wound was a shallow knife cut, maybe 4 inches long, along his ribs, painful and messy but not life-threatening unless it got infected. Fritz handed me gauze and tape, and I went to work while Halbert told his story. "Vincent Ramirez was a bookkeeper," he said, his voice gaining strength now that he was sitting down. "He worked for legitimate businesses on the surface, a restaurant supply company, a trucking outfit, a textile importer. But those businesses were fronts. They were all controlled by the Kings of Keller Block." "And you are?" Wolfe prompted, his tone suggesting he was already bored. "I'm an accountant. Was an accountant. Vincent and I worked together. We both knew what the numbers really meant. The protection money, the payoffs, the money laundering. Vincent kept 2 sets of books, the real ones and the ones he showed the bosses. Foolish. He was going to the federal prosecutors. He had evidence of everything, names, dates, amounts, connections to City Hall, the police department, even the district attorney's office. He thought he could bring down the whole organization. And instead, someone put 2 bullets in his head and left him in the Hudson River. That was 6 days ago. The police called it a gang dispute, filed it under unsolved, and moved on." Halbert's voice cracked. "But I know who did it, and I know why, and I know I'm next." Wolfe was silent for a long moment, his eyes half closed in what a stranger might mistake for drowsiness, but I recognized as intensive thought. Fritz had retreated to the kitchen. The dogs had settled into resting positions, still alert but no longer actively tense. Outside, a car passed on 35th Street, its headlights briefly illuminating the bulletproof glass of the office windows. Finally, Wolfe opened his eyes fully and fixed Halbert with a stare that had broken stronger men than this frightened accountant. "Who killed Vincent Ramirez?" "One of the Kings, but I don't know which one. That's the problem. The Kings aren't just a gang, Mr. Wolfe. They're a hierarchy, a pyramid. The street soldiers don't know the lieutenants don't know the captains, and nobody knows who sits at the top. Yet you claim to have knowledge.
I have Vincent's second ledger, the real books. He gave them to me 2 days before he died, told me to hide them, said if anything happened to him, I should... He stopped, swallowed. He said I should find someone who couldn't be bought, couldn't be threatened, and couldn't be killed. He said there was only one man in New York who fit that description.
Wolfe's grunt was eloquent. Your friend overestimated my invincibility and underestimated my disinclination toward heroism. But you'll help me? No. The word dropped like a stone. Dennis Halbert's face went white again, but this time it wasn't from blood loss. But I can pay. Money is irrelevant when weighed against my strong preference for continued existence. Gang warfare is sordid, dangerous, and intellectually unstimulating. I will not involve myself in it. They'll kill me. Very probably. Mr. Wolfe, Archie will provide you with the names of 3 competent investigators who specialize in such matters. I suggest you contact them immediately. Good evening. It was a dismissal, clean and final. I'd seen Wolfe do it 100 times, but Dennis Halbert didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket, carefully, mindful of both the wound and my hand that had drifted back toward my shoulder holster, and pulled out a small black notebook. This, he said quietly, is Vincent's ledger. It contains evidence of 47 murders. It names 19 police officers, 6 judges, 2 assemblymen, and 1 congressman as being on the King's payroll. It details a criminal enterprise that's been operating in Manhattan for 15 years. He set the notebook on Wolfe's desk with a soft thud. And it contains 1 entry that I think will interest you, Mr. Wolfe. An entry about an orchid grower named Horace Zimmerman, who refused to pay protection money to the Kings of Keller Block. He died in a fire. His greenhouses burned to the ground. Wolfe's hand, reaching for his book, stopped mid-air. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I remembered Horace Zimmerman. Wolfe had known him, not well, but enough to exchange letters about phalaenopsis cultivation and to trade seedlings twice a year. When Zimmerman died, Wolfe had been... I searched for the word. Wolfe was never quite emotional, but he'd been still, thoughtful, angry, maybe in the way mountains are angry when someone chips at their foundations. The fire had been ruled accidental, faulty wiring, the investigators said. Dennis Halbert's voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't faulty wiring, Mr. Wolfe. It was arson, ordered by the Kings, carried out by a man named... He flipped open the notebook, found a page. A man named Felix Gunther, who's now a lieutenant in the organization. Vincent documented everything. In the hall, Caesar rose to his feet. He'd sensed the change in the room, the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure that occurred when Nero Wolfe's considerable will focused on a single point. Wolfe's eyes were still on the notebook. Where is Mr. Gunther now? I don't know. The Kings don't advertise their locations, but he's still active, still killing, still working for whoever runs the organization. Silence filled the office like water, deep and dark. Then Wolfe reached forward, picked up the notebook, and opened it to the first page. His face remained impassive, but I knew that look. It was the look he got when he was about to do something expensive, dangerous, and completely unreasonable. Archie, he said without looking up, prepare the south bedroom for Mr. Halbert. He will remain here until this matter is resolved. Fritz will see to his meals. The dogs will alert us to any intrusion. We're taking the case? We are correcting an injustice. There is a distinction. He turned a page. Contact Saul and tell him to report here tomorrow at 11. Then telephone Nathaniel Parker and inform him we may require bail money in the near future. That's promising. Also Archie. Yeah? He looked up at me, and for just a moment, there was something in his eyes that wasn't calculation or irritation or routine. It was colder than that, sharper. Find out everything you can about the Kings of Keller Block. By Monday, I want to know their structure, their territory, their methods, and their weaknesses. He closed the notebook. They made a mistake when they touched Horace Zimmerman's orchids. What kind of mistake? Wolfe's smile was thin and utterly without humor, the kind that requires correction. Outside, the October wind rattled against the bulletproof windows. Caesar settled back to the floor, Diana yawned, and Loyal padded over to sniff at Dennis Halbert's shoes one more time before deciding the stranger was, provisionally acceptable. And I thought, here we go again. The Kings of Keller Block didn't know it yet, but they'd just declared war on the wrong 1/7 of a ton. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of grey sky that makes October in New York feel like a dress rehearsal for November. I was up at 7 earlier than usual, but Wolfe's declaration of war on the Kings of Keller Block had given me the kind of restless energy that makes sleep seem like a waste of time. Dennis Halbert was still asleep in the south bedroom, guarded by Mars and Apollo, who'd taken up positions outside his door around midnight. Wolfe had a theory about the dog's instincts. They could smell fear, pain, and guilt in concentrations invisible to human perception. Whatever they'd smelled on Halbert, it had triggered their protective protocols. I found Fritz in the kitchen, preparing Wolfe's breakfast tray, the same breakfast he'd prepared every day for the past decade. Poached eggs, grilled bacon, toast, and a pot of coffee that could strip paint. The routine never varied. Wolfe would take it in his room, read the morning papers, and descend to the office at precisely 9 o'clock, not a minute before. "How's our house guest?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. Fritz's expression was troubled. "He has nightmares, Archie. I heard him calling out twice in the night, something about water and darkness." He lowered his voice. "Do you think Mr. Wolfe can protect him?" "From the Kings of Keller Block? Ask me again when I know what the Kings of Keller Block actually are. They are dangerous men. So is Wolfe, when someone burns down his friend's orchid collections." Fritz nodded slowly, but the worry didn't leave his face. He'd been with Wolfe longer than I had, and he'd seen enough close calls to know that righteous anger, however justified, didn't stop bullets. I took my coffee to the office and started making calls. The first was to Saul Panzer, who answered on the second ring despite the early hour. Saul never slept past 6, a habit he'd picked up during the war and never shaken. He listened to my abbreviated version of last night's events without interruption, then said, "The Kings, that's ambitious." "You know them?" "I know of them. I've crossed paths with their organization twice in the last 5 years. Both times I was smart enough to back away." He paused. "Wolfe's really taking this on? Someone murdered an orchid grower. What do you think?" "I think I'll be there at 11. His tone shifted to business. "What do you need from me?" "Everything you know about their structure, territory, and operations. Wolfe wants a complete picture by Monday." "I'll bring what I have. But Archie, be careful with this one. The Kings aren't like the usual Park Avenue murderers Wolfe tangles with. These are professionals. They've survived in Hell's Kitchen for 15 years because they're smart, ruthless, and extremely well connected." "Noted. See you at 11. The second call was to Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon was a reporter, which meant he was a professional collector of secrets, rumors, and verifiable facts, usually in that order. We had an arrangement. I fed him tips on Wolfe's cases. He fed me information from the Gazette's files. It was mercenary, mutually beneficial, and occasionally life-saving. "Goodwin," he said when he picked up, "it's 7:30 on a Saturday. Someone better be dead." "Several people, actually. Tell me about the Kings of Keller Block." The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. Then, "Jesus, Archie, what has Wolfe gotten himself into?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." "All right, but not over the phone. Meet me at Moretti's at 8:30, and come alone. The Kings have informants everywhere, including the phone company." He hung up before I could respond. I sat back in Wolfe's chair, a liberty I took only when he wasn't around to glare at me, and thought about what Saul and Lon had both implied. The Kings of Keller Block weren't just dangerous, they were connected, which meant this case was going to be uglier than usual. From the hallway, I heard the click of claws on hardwood. Caesar appeared in the doorway, looked at me sitting in Wolfe's chair, and made a sound that might have been disapproval, or maybe gas. It was hard to tell with Dobermans. "Don't judge," I told him. "I'm working." He wasn't impressed, but he settled on his haunches near the door, and within moments Diana had joined him, curling up against his flank. The dogs operated as a pack, but there was a clear hierarchy. Caesar led, Mars enforced, and the others filled specialized roles. Loyal, who'd just padded in from the kitchen, had appointed himself the household's early warning system. He positioned himself near the front windows, nose twitching at scents from the street below. At 8:15, I heard Wolfe's elevator descending from his bedroom. He emerged, a mountain in yellow pajamas and brown slippers, and fixed me with a look of profound irritation. "You're in my chair." keeping it warm for you. It requires no warming. He waited until I'd vacated, then lowered himself with the careful precision of a cargo ship docking. Report. I gave him the summary. Saul would arrive at 11 with information. Lon Cohen wanted a face-to-face meeting, and Dennis Halbert was still alive and sleeping. Wolfe grunted. What have you learned about the Kings? That everyone who knows about them is scared to talk about them, which tells us something. It tells us nothing useful. Fear is universal. I want specifics. He opened Vincent Ramirez's black notebook, which he'd been reading until 2 in the morning. This ledger is remarkable, methodical, detailed, but it raises more questions than it answers. Such as? The structure, Archie? The Kings operate in cells. Street soldiers report to lieutenants. Lieutenants report to captains. Captains report to... He waved a hand. Someone. But there's no name, no identification, just references to the crown. Creative. Frustrating. It suggests a level of operational security uncommon in criminal enterprises. Most gangs are betrayed from within. Someone gets greedy. Someone gets scared. Someone makes a deal. But the Kings have survived 15 years with apparently 0 defections. That's extraordinary. Maybe they're just good at killing people who talk. Undoubtedly. But it suggests something more. Loyalty. Real loyalty. Not merely fear. Which means there's a philosophy at work. An organizing principle. He tapped the notebook. I need to understand what binds these men together before I can determine how to break them apart. It was classic Wolfe. Reduce the problem to its essence. Identify the weak point, then apply pressure with surgical precision. The approach worked brilliantly with Park Avenue poisoners and embezzling executives. I wasn't sure how it would work with street soldiers who settled disputes with knives and baseball bats. At 8:25, I headed out to meet Lon Cohen. Moretti's was a coffee shop on 10th Avenue, 5 blocks from the brownstone and 100 miles from civilization. It was the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the clientele was suspicious, and asking too many questions could get you a broken nose. I liked it. Lon was already there, occupying a corner booth, with a view of both entrances. He looked tired. Reporters always look tired. And he'd been nursing the same cup of coffee long enough that it had probably gone cold. You're late, he said as I slid in across from him. Traffic. You walked. Slow walker. He didn't smile. Tell me you're kidding about the Kings. No joke. Wolfe's taken the case. Someone murdered an orchid grower, and it traces back to them. Lon's expression shifted from tired to grim. An orchid grower. Jesus. That's personal for Wolfe, isn't it? Personal enough that he's housing a witness, planning an investigation, and generally doing everything I've spent years trying to talk him out of. Then talk harder. Lon leaned forward, his voice dropping. The Kings aren't some small-time operation you can push around. They control 6 square blocks of Hell's Kitchen, the Keller Block area, west of 9th Avenue between 48th and 54th. They run protection rackets, smuggling operations, labor racketeering, and numbers games. They gross somewhere north of $2 million a year, and that's a conservative estimate. What's their specialty? Violence. Professional, calculated violence. They don't start wars, they end them. Someone causes trouble in their territory. The Kings make an example, usually permanent. The cops have investigated 12 murders in the last 5 years that they're pretty sure connect to the Kings. They haven't made a single arrest. Because the cops are on the take? Some of them, sure, but mostly because nobody talks. The Kings have a reputation for hunting down witnesses, their families, their friends, anyone who might testify. There was a case 3 years ago. A warehouse clerk who saw a King's enforcer beat a man to death with a crowbar. The clerk agreed to testify. 2 days later, his apartment building caught fire. He made it out, but his wife and daughter didn't. The police? Ruled it accidental, faulty gas line. Lon's expression was bleak. After that, witnesses stopped coming forward. Can you blame them? I couldn't. But I also couldn't tell Wolfe to back off, not when he'd already committed. What about the leadership? Who runs the organization? That's the question everyone wants answered. The Gazette has been investigating the Kings for 6 years. We've identified maybe 24 street-level operatives, a handful of lieutenants, and exactly 0 captains or bosses. Whoever runs the Kings is a ghost. Someone must know. If they do, they're not telling us, or anyone else. He pulled a folded envelope from his jacket, and slid it across the table. "This is everything we've got. Names, addresses, known associates, suspected operations. It's not much, but it's a start." I pocketed the envelope. "What do I owe you?" "The exclusive, when Wolfe solves this, assuming he survives to solve it." Lon stood, dropped $1 on the table. "Be careful, Archie. These aren't the usual suspects. The Kings are different. They're patient, they're organized, and they play for keeps." "So does Wolfe." "Yeah, but Wolfe's one guy in a brownstone. The Kings are an army." He left, and I sat there for another minute, drinking his cold coffee and thinking about orchid growers who refused to pay protection money. Then I walked back to West 35th Street, where 5 Dobermans, 1 pit bull, and 1/7 of a ton of genius were waiting to take on an army. By the time I got back, it was 9:40, and the brownstone had come alive with activity. Wolfe was in the office, reading. Dennis Halbert was in the front room, looking pale but upright, with Minerva stationed nearby. Fritz was in the kitchen, preparing lunch, and the dogs had redistributed themselves throughout the first floor, creating an organic security system that would have impressed a military planner. I gave Wolfe the envelope from Lon Cohen and summarized the conversation. He listened without comment, then spent 20 minutes reviewing the Gazette's files while I caught up on correspondence. At precisely 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. This time, it was just one ring, firm and businesslike. The dogs stirred but didn't react with alarm. They knew this visitor. I checked the peephole anyway, confirmed it was Saul Panzer, and opened the door. Saul was small, wiry, and possessed of a face that could blend into any crowd on earth. He was also the best freelance operative in New York, possibly in the country. Wolfe paid him premium rates and considered it money well spent. Caesar and Mars approached him with tails wagging, as close to enthusiasm as Dobermans got, and Loyal actually let Saul scratch behind his ears, an honor reserved for family. "Morning, Archie." Saul handed me his coat and hat. "Is Wolfe in the office?" "Where else? Fair warning, he's in what Fritz calls his Montenegrine mood." "Wonderful. Those always end well." We found Wolfe at his desk, Vincent Ramirez's ledger open before him. He looked up as we entered, grunted a greeting, and gestured Saul to the red leather chair. "You know about the Kings," Wolfe said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Tell me what the police don't know." Saul settled into the chair with the economy of movement that characterized everything he did. The Kings started 15 years ago as a loosement of dock workers who got tired of being squeezed by the longshoremen's union. They organized, fought back, and won. Then they realized they could apply the same model to other industries: restaurants, warehouses, trucking companies. Within 5 years, they controlled a significant portion of Hell's Kitchen's informal economy. Leadership? Unknown. But there are patterns. The Kings recruit from specific demographics: military veterans, former boxers, men with families who need the money. They offer good pay, steady work, and loyalty in return for discipline. It's more like a military unit than a traditional gang. How are they organized? Cells of 5 to 7 men, each with a lieutenant. The cells operate independently most of the time, but they can coordinate for larger operations. Communication flows upward through the chain of command, but almost never horizontally. A soldier in one cell doesn't know the soldiers in another cell. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You sound like you've studied them." "I have. 2 years ago, a client hired me to track a shipment of stolen pharmaceuticals. The trail led to a warehouse in Hell's Kitchen. I got close enough to see the operation, then smart enough to back away when I realized it was run by the Kings." "And you reported this to the police?" "I tried. The detective I spoke with told me very politely to forget what I'd seen and go home. He didn't say it explicitly, but the message was clear: the Kings were off limits." "Because of corruption?" "Because of self-preservation." Saul leaned forward. "Mr. Wolfe, the Kings have been investigated by the NYPD, the District Attorney's Office, the FBI, and the Treasury Department. Every investigation has failed. Witnesses recant, evidence disappears, investigators get transferred or retire early. It's not just that the Kings are well connected, it's that they're systematic about protecting themselves." Wolfe was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the desk. Then, "Who is their greatest enemy?" Saul didn't hesitate. "Each other. There are rumors, never confirmed, of internal power struggles. A lieutenant who disappeared last year. A captain who supposedly challenged the crown and ended up in the East River. If there's a weakness in their organization, it's ambition. Then we'll exploit it. Wolfe closed the ledger. Archie, you'll begin field investigation Monday morning. Saul, I want you to identify 3 current King's operatives who might be persuaded to talk. Fritz will prepare lunch at 1:30. We have work to do. It was a dismissal and a declaration of intent. The investigation had officially begun. And somewhere in Hell's Kitchen, the Kings of Keller Block were going about their business, unaware that a very large, very stubborn, very angry orchid enthusiast had just decided they needed to be stopped. Monday morning came with rain, the cold, persistent kind that turns October into a preview of winter and makes New York smell like wet concrete and regret. I was dressed for trouble. Old jacket, scuffed shoes and a hat that had seen better decades. The goal was to blend into Hell's Kitchen, not stand out like a Upper East Side accountant slumming for thrills. Wolfe had spent Sunday locked in the office with Vincent Ramirez's ledger, emerging only for meals and his sacred afternoon session in the plant rooms. When he finally surfaced Sunday evening, he'd compiled a list of 17 names, people mentioned in the ledger who might still be alive, still scared, and still in possession of information worth having. Start with the victims, he'd instructed. People who've paid protection money to the Kings. They'll be frightened, but fear makes people talkative if you approach them correctly. Define correctly. With sympathy, Archie, and cash, $50 should loosen most tongues. Now standing at the corner of 9th Avenue and 50th Street, I understood why Wolfe had never left his brownstone to see Hell's Kitchen for himself. The neighborhood had a particular quality, not quite menacing, not quite defeated, but something in between. The buildings were old, their facades streaked with soot and water damage. The storefronts advertised services in languages I couldn't read. And the people moved with the careful awareness of those who'd learned that trouble could arrive from any direction. I'd left the Heron sedan 6 blocks away. Walking in was smarter. Cars got noticed, remembered, and in the wrong circumstances, vandalized or worse. My first stop was a small grocery on 49th Street. According to the ledger, the owner, a man named Otto Kellner, had been paying the Kings $200 a month for the past 3 years. The entry was methodical. Dates, amounts, and a note in Vincent Ramirez's careful handwriting. Subject compliant. No resistance. The grocery was narrow and dark, smelling of coffee, cheese, and old wood. A bell chimed as I entered. Behind the counter, a man looked up from a newspaper. 60s, heavy build, suspicious eyes. Help you? His accent was German, thick and unapologetic. Mr. Kellner? The suspicion deepened. Who's asking? I pulled out my wallet, extracted a card, and slid it across the counter. Archie Goodwin. I'm a private investigator. I'm looking into some financial irregularities involving businesses in this neighborhood. He barely glanced at the card. I don't know nothing about nothing. I haven't asked you anything yet. Don't matter. Answers still no. He went back to his newspaper, a gesture of dismissal so complete it would have made Wolfe proud. I tried a different approach. Mr. Kellner, I'm not with the police. I'm not with the city. I'm not here to cause you trouble. But I am investigating the Kings of Keller Block, and I know you've been paying them protection money. His hands tightened on the newspaper. You need to leave. I can pay for information. $50 for 15 minutes of your time. I said leave. His voice was louder now, edged with panic. I don't know you. I don't know what you're talking about. And if you're smart, you'll forget you ever came here. Mr. Kellner, get out. The shout echoed through the small store. In the back, a door opened, and a younger man appeared, maybe 30, with Otto Kellner's build and his eyes. Son, probably. He assessed the situation in 2 seconds and moved to stand beside his father, his posture protective. Problem, Pop? No problem. Gentleman was just leaving. I recognized a dead end when I saw one. I picked up my card, tipped my hat, and walked out. Behind me, I heard rapid German, the father explaining, the son responding, both voices tight with fear. Strike one. The second name on my list was a restaurant owner named Maria DeMarco, who ran a small Italian place on 51st Street. According to the ledger, she'd been paying protection money for 5 years, longer than most, which suggested either extraordinary stubbornness or extraordinary fear. The restaurant wasn't open yet. It was only 10:30, but I could see movement through the front window. I knocked, waited, and eventually the door opened a crack. The woman who peered out was in her 40s, with dark hair pulled back and eyes that had seen too much. "We're closed." "Mrs. DeMarco, I'm Archie Goodwin. I'm investigating." "I know who you are." She opened the door wider, which surprised me. "You were just at Otto Kellner's grocery. He called me, said some investigator was asking about the Kings." Word travels fast. "In this neighborhood? You sneeze on 49th Street. They say Gesundheit on 54th. She stepped back. "Come in, but make it quick." The restaurant was small but clean, with red-checked tablecloths and the smell of garlic and tomatoes that promised good food when it finally opened. Maria DeMarco led me to a booth near the back and sat down across from me, her hands folded on the table. "You're either very brave or very stupid," she said, asking about the Kings. "I've been called both, usually on the same day." She didn't smile. "What do you want?" "Information. I'm working for Nero Wolfe, the detective. I've heard of him. And we're investigating several murders connected to the Kings. One of those murders was a man named Vincent Ramirez." Her expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "I don't know that name." He was a bookkeeper. He kept records of all the protection payments in this neighborhood. "Your name is in his ledger, Mrs. DeMarco. $250 a month for 5 years. That's $15,000. Prove it." "I'd rather not. I'd rather you help me understand how the Kings operate. Who collects the money? Who gives the orders? Who decides?" "Stop." She held up a hand. "You don't understand. You can't understand, because you don't live here. The Kings. They're not like other gangs. They don't just threaten you. They don't just hurt you. They erase you." "Erase?" "They make you disappear. Your business burns down. Your family has accidents. Your children get followed home from school." Her voice was steady, but her hands had started to shake. 6 years ago, a man named Philip Russo owned a butcher shop 2 blocks from here. He refused to pay, said he'd go to the police, to the newspapers, to anyone who'd listen. 2 weeks later, his shop was gone, burned to the ground. And Philip, she paused, they found him in an alley. They'd used his own meat hooks. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The police? Called it a robbery gone wrong. Case closed. She looked at me directly. "You want to know how the Kings operate? That's how. They don't need to kill everyone. They just need to kill enough people, in creative enough ways, that the rest of us learn to shut up and pay. But someone must resist. Someone must fight back. And they end up like Vincent Ramirez, in the river." She stood abruptly. "I've told you more than I should have. You need to leave now. If they find out I talked to you..." "They won't. They find out everything." She walked to the door and opened it. "Tell your Mr. Wolfe to be careful. The Kings don't care how smart you are or how many brownstones you hide in. They'll come for him, the same way they came for everyone else. We have dogs. So did Philip Russo." I left, and this time I heard the door lock behind me with a finality that suggested Maria DeMarco had used up her entire lifetime supply of courage in one 10-minute conversation. Strike 2, but at least I'd gotten something. A name, Philip Russo, and a pattern. The Kings didn't just kill people, they made examples of them. By noon I'd talked to 4 more people on Wolfe's list. 2 had refused to speak to me at all, 1 had threatened to call the police, and 1, an elderly tailor named Samuel Hirsch, had listened to my pitch, studied my face for a long moment, and then said something I didn't expect. "You should talk to Thomas Brennan." "Who's Thomas Brennan?" "A drunk, an ex-cop, and the only man in Hell's Kitchen who ever tried to bring down the Kings from the inside. He'd given me an address on 53rd Street, then added, 'But be careful, Thomas talks too much when he's sober, and even more when he's not. The Kings let him live because he's harmless, but anyone who listens to him, that's different.'" I found the address just after 1 o'clock, a tenement building that looked like it was held together by rust and desperation. The apartment was on the 4th floor, and the stairs creaked under my weight like they were considering giving up entirely. I knocked on door 4C. No answer. I knocked again, harder. "Go away." The voice from inside was thick, slurred, and hostile. "Mr. Brennan? My name is Archie Goodwin. I'm an investigator. I'd like to talk to you about the Kings of Keller Block." Silence. Then the sound of locks being undone, 3 of them, from the sound of it. The door opened 6 inches, held by a chain, and a face appeared in the gap. Thomas Brennan had been handsome once. You could still see it in the bone structure, the jawline, the eyes that were bloodshot now, but had probably been sharp when he was younger. He was maybe 50, unshaven, wearing a stained undershirt and pants that had forgotten what an iron looked like. "Who sent you?" he asked. "Nobody sent me. I'm working for Nero Wolfe." "The fat detective?" "He prefers the genius detective, but yes." Brennan studied me through the gap, then apparently decided I wasn't an immediate threat. He undid the chain and opened the door. "Come in, but if you're wearing a wire, I'll know." "No wire, just questions." The apartment was small, dark, and smelled like whiskey and old cigarettes. The furniture looked like it had been scavenged from several different decades. The only personal touch was a photograph on the wall, Brennan in a police uniform, younger and sober, standing with a woman and 2 kids. He saw me looking at it. Ancient history. She left, took the kids. Can you blame her? Not if she knew what was coming. Nobody knew what was coming. He gestured to a chair. "Sit. You want a drink?" "It's 1 in the afternoon." "That's not what I asked." "No thanks." He shrugged and poured himself 3 fingers of something brown from a bottle that didn't have a label. He drank half of it in 1 swallow, then sat down across from me on a sofa that sagged in the middle. "All right, Mr. Goodwin. You want to know about the Kings. Everyone wants to know about the Kings. The feds, the DA, the newspapers, but nobody wants to actually do anything about them. I do." "Why?" "They kill someone you love." "They killed an orchid grower." He blinked. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. A bitter, rasping sound. "An orchid grower. Jesus. That's the most Nero Wolfe thing I've ever heard." He finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. "All right, I'll tell you about the Kings, but first you need to understand something. I used to be one of them." That stopped me. "You were a king?" "For 6 months. 12 years ago, I was a detective then, working organized crime. My captain had a brilliant idea. Infiltrate the Kings, gather evidence from the inside, bring down the whole operation. I volunteered." He poured himself another drink. "Worst decision of my life." "What happened?" "I got in. That was the easy part. The Kings were recruiting, and I had the background they wanted. Military service, clean record, family man. They put me in a cell, gave me assignments, watched me prove myself. For 3 months, I gathered evidence, names, dates, operations, everything the department needed for a major bust. And then I tried to arrest one of the lieutenants, a man named Victor Straub. Real piece of work, organized 3 murders that I knew of, probably a dozen I didn't. I thought I had enough evidence to take him down, maybe flip him, get him to testify against the higher-ups." He stared at his glass. "The day before the arrest, my captain called me into his office, told me the operation was over, told me to destroy my evidence and forget everything I'd learned. When I asked why, he said," Brennan's voice dropped. "He said Victor Straub was off limits, protected from the top, and if I valued my life, my pension, and my family's safety, I'd walk away." "Did you?" "Eventually, but not before I tried going to the FBI, the DA, the newspapers. Nobody wanted to touch it. The Kings had connections everywhere. By the time I realized how deep it went, it was too late. I'd made noise, asked the wrong questions, pushed the wrong people." He gestured around the apartment. "This is what you get for pushing. They threw you off the force. Worse, they left me on it. Let me keep my badge and my gun while everyone knew I was finished. Took me 2 years to drink myself into a resignation." He looked at me with eyes that were suddenly clearer than they'd been since I arrived. "So here's my advice, Mr. Goodwin. Tell your boss to drop this. The Kings can't be beaten. They've been investigated by everyone who matters, and they're still here, still operating, still winning. Wolfe doesn't drop cases. Then he'll end up like me. Or worse, like Vincent Ramirez." Brennan leaned forward. "You want to know the real secret of the Kings. It's not their violence. It's not their connections. It's that they're patient. They'll wait months, years if they have to. But eventually, they get everyone who crosses them. Who runs them? I don't know. Nobody knows. When I was inside, I only ever met my cell lieutenant. He reported to someone, who reported to someone else, who maybe reported to whoever sits at the top. The Crown, they called him, or her. I never found out which. But you have theories. Theories don't arrest people, Mr. Goodwin, and theories sure as hell don't keep you alive. He stood abruptly, swaying slightly. I think you should leave now. You've got what you came for, and I've talked more than I should have. I rose and handed him one of my cards. If you think of anything else, I won't. Or if you just want to talk to someone who's actually trying to stop them. Nobody can stop them. Wolfe can. He looked at me with something between pity and disbelief. Good luck with that. I left Thomas Brennan to his bottle and his memories and walked back out into the rain, which had intensified from persistent to punishing. By the time I reached the Heron sedan, I was soaked through and thinking hard about everything I'd learned. The Kings were organized, patient, and ruthless. They had protection at the highest levels. They made examples of anyone who resisted, and they'd been operating successfully for 15 years with apparently zero oversight. Which meant Wolfe was right. There was a philosophy at work, an organizing principle that went beyond simple greed or violence. I needed to figure out what that principle was before it figured out us. I got back to the brownstone at 3:15, dripping on Fritz's clean floors and drawing immediate attention from the dogs. Caesar approached and sniffed at my pants leg, then made a sound in his throat that might have been concern or commentary. I smelled like Hell's Kitchen, wet concrete, old buildings and fear. Wolfe was in the office, reading a book on orchid taxonomy. He looked up as I entered. You're wet. It's raining. That's no excuse for dripping on my rug. He closed the book. Report. I gave him everything. The terrified grocery owner, Maria DeMarco's warning, the story of Philip Rousseau, and Thomas Brennan's 6-month stint as an undercover operative that had cost him his career and his family. Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes half closed, his fingers interlaced across his middle mound. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then, Thomas Brennan. He's our entry point. He's a drunk who's given up. He won't help us. He doesn't need to help us. He needs to help himself. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. He spent 6 months inside the King's organization. That means he knows things. Operational details, recruitment methods, security protocols. Things that aren't in Vincent Ramirez's ledger. He said he doesn't know who runs them. But he knows how they run. That's equally valuable. Wolfe reached for his beer. Fritz had brought a tray at 3 o'clock, right on schedule, and took a long drink. Tomorrow you'll return to Mr. Brennan's apartment. You'll offer him employment. $500 to consult on this case, he'll refuse. You'll offer him $1,000. He'll accept? What if he doesn't? Then offer him what he really wants, a chance to hurt the people who destroyed his life. Wolfe set down his glass. Everyone wants something, Archie. Mr. Brennan wants revenge. We'll give it to him. And if the Kings find out? They will find out. That's the point. We want them to know we're investigating. We want them worried, distracted and reactive. People make mistakes when they're reactive. I thought about Philip Rousseau and his meat hooks. People also die when they're reactive. Which is why we have precautions. He gestured to the hall, where 5 Dobermans and 1 pit bull had arranged themselves in a configuration that suggested they'd been listening to our entire conversation. The Kings may be formidable, Archie, but they've never faced an opponent who's both brilliant and properly guarded. Modest, too. Modesty is for people with something to hide. I'm hiding nothing, especially not my intention to dismantle their organization and expose whoever murdered Horace Zimmerman. He returned to his book, the conversation over. I went upstairs to change into dry clothes and think about what came next. Somewhere in Hell's Kitchen, the Kings of Keller Block were going about their business, unaware that a 1/7 of a ton of Montenegrin stubbornness had just declared war on them, with the full backing of 6 highly trained guard dogs and 1 investigator who was starting to think this case might actually get him killed. It was going to be an interesting week. One Tuesday morning. No, scratch that. It was Wednesday. Wednesday morning brought sunshine, which felt like a personal affront after Monday's deluge. I was at Thomas Brennan's tenement by 9:30, carrying an envelope with $1,000 in 50s and the kind of pitch I'd rehearsed 3 times in the mirror. Brennan answered on the second knock. He looked marginally better than he had on Monday. Showered, shaved, wearing clean clothes, which suggested either he'd found religion or he'd run out of whiskey. My money was on the latter. "Mr. Goodwin." He didn't sound surprised. "I wondered if you'd be back. May I come in?" He stepped aside without arguing, which was progress. The apartment looked the same, cramped, dark and haunted by better days, but someone had made an effort to clean up. The empty bottles were gone, the ashtrays were emptied, and the photograph of his family had been straightened on the wall. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." He poured 2 cups from a pot that looked like it had been sitting on the hot plate since yesterday. The coffee was thick, bitter, and probably capable of removing rust. I drank it anyway. "You're here to make me an offer," Brennan said, settling into his sagging sofa. "Your boss wants information about the Kings, and he's willing to pay for it. $500. Consulting fee. Not enough. 1,000. He smiled, tired, knowing, and sad. "Still not enough, Mr. Goodwin, because you're not just buying information. You're buying a target painted on my back. The Kings will find out. They always find out. And when they do," he gestured around the apartment, "I don't have much, but I'd prefer to keep it, including my life. Wolfe can protect you." "How? With dogs and bulletproof windows?" He shook his head. "The Kings don't attack directly. They're patient. They'll wait until I leave the brownstone. Then they'll grab me off the street. Or they'll burn down this building with everyone in it. Or they'll—" He stopped, the scenarios apparently too numerous to list. "You see my problem. I see a man who's been running for 12 years. Must get exhausting." His expression hardened. "What would you know about it?" "Nothing. But I know what Wolfe knows. Everyone wants something. You want revenge. We're offering you a chance to get it. Revenge doesn't pay rent." "No, but $1,000 does. Plus, I pulled out a second envelope, thicker than the first. Another 5,000 when we bring down the Kings, and we will bring them down, Mr. Brennan, with or without your help. The only question is whether you want to be part of it." He stared at the envelopes on the table between us. $6,000 total, 6 months' rent, a year's worth of groceries, or, more likely given his habits, 6 months' worth of whiskey and regret. "Why does Nero Wolfe care?" he asked quietly. "The Kings aren't his usual clientele. They're not Park Avenue murderers or embezzling executives. They're street soldiers. Why risk his life, your life, for them? They killed an orchid grower. You told me that before, but there has to be more to it." "There is. The orchid grower was Wolfe's friend, and the Kings burned down his greenhouses because he refused to pay protection money. Wolfe takes that personally. Over orchids? Over principle. Wolfe has this peculiar notion that the world should operate according to logic and justice. When it doesn't, he corrects it." Brennan laughed, the same bitter rasp I'd heard on Monday. "Must be nice to have principles. I had those once. Lost them somewhere between my divorce and my 5th drink." He reached for the envelopes, hesitated, then pulled back. "If I do this, if I help you, I need guarantees, protection, a place to stay that isn't this dump. We have a guest room, south-facing, clean sheets, 3 meals a day prepared by the best cook in Manhattan, and 6 dogs who are very good at keeping unwanted visitors away." 6 dogs? 5 Dobermans and a pit bull. They're part of the security system. He considered this. Your boss really doesn't take chances, does he? Not when someone's burned down an orchid collection. That got a genuine smile, small but real. Brennan picked up the envelopes, weighed them in his hands, then tucked them inside his jacket. "All right, Mr. Goodwin, you've got yourself a consultant, but I want it on record. This is probably going to get us all killed." "Noted. Can you be ready to move in an hour?" "I've been ready to leave this place for 10 years. Give me 15 minutes. We arrived at the brownstone just before 11. Brennan carried a single battered suitcase that looked like it had survived both world wars and several domestic disputes. Fritz met us at the door, took one look at our new house guest, and immediately went into caretaker mode. "Mr. Brennan, welcome. I am Fritz Brenner. You will be staying in the south room, yes? Come, I will show you. Then lunch at 1 o'clock. We are having veal cutlets, cordon bleu, with—" "Fritz," I interrupted, "maybe give the man a chance to catch his breath." "Of course. This way, please." The dogs had assembled in the front hall, not aggressively, but attentively. Caesar approached first, gave Brennan a thorough sniffing, then apparently decided he was acceptable. Mars followed suit, and within moments all 6 dogs had completed their inspection and returned to their posts. Brennan watched this with the expression of a man who just witnessed something mildly supernatural. They really do guard the place. Among other things, Caesar can open doors, Diana can hear someone breathing from 3 rooms away, and Loyal once bit through a leather belt to stop an intruder. What happened to the intruder? We sent him to the hospital, then to jail, in that order. Fritz led Brennan upstairs, and I found Wolfe in the office, reading the morning papers. He looked up as I entered. Success. $1,000 poorer, but yes, Brennan's moving in. He'll be down after he's settled. Excellent. Wolfe folded the newspaper with the precision of a surgeon completing a procedure. I've been reviewing Vincent Ramirez's ledger again. There's a pattern I missed initially. What kind of pattern? The payments vary in amount, but they follow a schedule. Businesses pay on the 1st and 15th of each month. Always those dates, never others. That suggests a centralized collection system, someone coordinating pickups across multiple locations. A lieutenant? Or several lieutenants, each responsible for specific territories. He pulled out a sheet of paper covered in his distinctive handwriting. I've mapped the payments by location. There are clusters, 6 of them, corresponding to the 6 blocks the Kings control. Each cluster has approximately 20 to 30 businesses paying protection money. That's a lot of businesses. That's a lot of money. 200 to 500 per business, twice monthly, across roughly 150 businesses. He did the math silently. Somewhere between $60,000 and $150,000 per month. Nearly $1 million per year in protection money alone, and that's not counting their other operations. Smuggling, gambling, labor racketeering. I let out a low whistle. No wonder they can afford to buy cops and judges. Indeed. But here's what's interesting. The amounts increase over time. A business that paid $200 in 1948 pays $300 in 1952. The increases are gradual, systematic, and universal. They're not arbitrary, they're calculated. Inflation? Possibly, but I suspect it's more deliberate than that. They're testing limits, seeing how much they can extract before businesses fail or revolt. It's almost, he paused, searching for the word, scientific. Scientific gangsters, that's a cheerful thought. It suggests intelligence at the top level. Someone with business acumen, not just street instincts. Someone who understands economics, logistics, and organizational management. Someone like who? That's what we need to determine. He checked his watch, 11:40. When Mr. Brennan comes down, I'll want to interview him about the King's internal structure. You'll listen and take notes. Then this afternoon you'll visit 3 more witnesses from the ledger. Choose carefully. I want people who might break under the right pressure. What kind of pressure? Moral pressure. Guilt. The suggestion that their cooperation could prevent future murders. His eyes were cold. The Kings have been operating freely for 15 years because no one has challenged them effectively. We're going to change that. By making ourselves targets. By making ourselves inevitable. He picked up his beer glass, found it empty, and looked offended. Where is Fritz? It's nearly noon. Settling in our house guest, the one we're using as bait. Mr. Brennan is not bait. He's a resource. Semantics. Precision. There's a difference. The doorbell rang. This time, the dog's reaction was different. Caesar rose immediately. Mars flanked him, and Diana let out a single sharp bark before remembering that barking was discouraged. Loyal, positioned near the front windows, had his nose pressed to the glass, his stub tail rigid. That, I said, is either Inspector Kramer or someone the dogs think deserves the full committee treatment. Answer it. I crossed to the hall, checked the peephole, and confirmed my guess. Inspector Kramer stood on the stoop, looking like he'd aged 5 years since I'd last seen him 3 weeks ago. His face was weathered, his suit needed pressing, and his expression suggested he was here to deliver bad news, arrest someone, or possibly both. I opened the door. Inspector, what a delightful surprise. Can it, Goodwin? Is Wolfe here? He's always here. You know that? Then I need to talk to him. Now. The dogs had recognized Kramer. They didn't relax exactly. but they shifted from defensive mode to watchful mode. Caesar approached and allowed Kramer to scratch behind his ears, a privilege the inspector had earned through years of repeated visits. Mars maintained his distance, still suspicious. Diana yawned. Kramer noticed. "You've got all 6 out today. Expecting trouble?" "We've got a house guest. They're on alert." "What kind of house guest?" "The kind who pays rent and minds his own business. You want to see Wolfe or interrogate me?" He scowled and headed for the office without waiting for an escort. I followed, closing the door behind us. Wolfe looked up from his desk. "Inspector, to what do I owe this interruption?" "You tell me." Kramer remained standing, which was never a good sign. "I'm hearing rumors, disturbing rumors, about you poking around Hell's Kitchen, asking questions about the Kings of Keller Block. Rumors are rarely reliable. These ones are. I've had 3 calls this morning from precinct captains asking why a private investigator is bothering businesses in their jurisdiction. One of those captains suggested politely that I tell you to back off before you get hurt." "How considerate." "Wolfe, I'm serious. The Kings aren't some amateur hour operation you can push around. They're organized, connected, and extremely dangerous. If you're investigating them, you need to stop." "I decline." "I'm not asking. I'm telling you, drop it. Whatever case you think you have, it's not worth your life." Wolfe's voice dropped to a tone I'd heard only a handful of times, quiet, cold, and absolutely immovable. 6 days ago, a man named Vincent Ramirez was murdered because he kept accurate records. 4 years ago, a man named Horace Zimmerman was burned alive because he refused to pay protection money. And for 15 years, the Kings of Keller Block have terrorized an entire neighborhood, while the police, your police, Inspector, have done nothing. I will not drop it. Zimmerman's death was ruled accidental. It was arson, murder, and you know it. Kramer's face reddened. What I know is that every investigation into the Kings has failed. The FBI tried. The DA tried. My department tried. We've lost evidence, witnesses, and 2 undercover officers. These people don't play games, Wolfe. Neither do I. Then you're going to get yourself killed. Archie, show the inspector out. Kramer didn't move. I came here as a courtesy, to warn you, but if you keep pushing this, I can't protect you. I haven't asked for protection. You've got a witness here, Dennis Halbert. The Kings want him. That stopped me. I looked at Wolfe, whose expression had shifted from cold to dangerous. "How?" Wolfe said quietly. "Do you know Mr. Halbert is here?" Kramer had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Word gets around." "From whom?" "I can't tell you that." "Then I'll assume from someone within your department, someone who reports to the Kings." Wolfe leaned forward slightly, which given his bulk was almost theatrical. "You see the problem, Inspector? You warn me that the Kings are dangerous, and in the same breath you confirm they have sources inside the police department. This is precisely why private citizens like Mr. Halbert come to me instead of you. Wolfe, the Kings murdered a friend of mine. They've murdered dozens of others, and they've done so with apparent impunity because institutions that should stop them, your institution, are either corrupted or paralyzed. I intend to correct that. By getting yourself killed. By being more stubborn than they are ruthless." Kramer stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're a damn fool." "Quite possibly. But I'm a damn fool with principles. Good day, Inspector." Kramer looked like he wanted to argue further, gave up, and stalked out of the office. I followed him to the door where Caesar and Mars watched his departure with the same wary respect they always showed him. At the threshold, Kramer turned back to me. "Goodwin, listen. I'm not the enemy here. I'm trying to keep you alive. But if Wolfe won't listen to reason, then you need to watch your back. The Kings play for keeps. So does Wolfe. Wolfe's one man. One man with 6 dogs, 2 house guests who can't afford to run, and an investigator who's too stubborn to quit. We'll manage. Will you?" He looked genuinely worried, which was unsettling. Kramer and Wolfe had a complicated relationship, part adversarial, part grudgingly respectful, but underneath it was something approaching friendship. The last investigator who went after the Kings ended up in the East River. The one before that just disappeared. "I don't want to fish you out of the Hudson, Goodwin." "Then help us." "I can't. Can't or won't." He didn't answer. He just put on his hat, descended the steps, and disappeared into a unmarked police car that had been idling at the curb. I closed the door, secured all 3 locks, and returned to the office, where Wolfe was reading again, as if nothing had happened. "Well," I said, "that was illuminating." "Indeed. The Kings know Mr. Halbert is here. They know we're investigating, and they have sources inside the police department." He turned a page. "Everything is proceeding according to plan." "You have a plan?" "I have several plans. Most of them involve making the Kings so nervous they make mistakes. And if their mistake is burning down the brownstone, then Fritz will be very upset about his kitchen. But I doubt they'll go that far. Not yet. First they'll try intimidation, then surveillance, then possibly a direct approach." He looked up. "Which is why we have dogs, bulletproof windows, and you. Comforting." "I thought so." From upstairs I heard footsteps, Thomas Brennan coming down. A moment later, he appeared in the office doorway, looking cleaner, more rested, and significantly more nervous than he had that morning. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm ready to talk whenever you are." Wolfe gestured to the red leather chair. "Please sit, Mr. Brennan. We have much to discuss. Archie, your notebook." I pulled out my notebook, and Thomas Brennan began telling us everything he knew about the Kings of Keller Block, their structure, their methods, their philosophy, and their secrets. It was going to be a long afternoon. Thomas Brennan settled into the red leather chair like a man preparing for confession. He'd cleaned up well. Fritz had that effect on people, but there was still a tremor in his hands that 12 years of drinking hadn't quite erased. The dogs had arranged themselves around the office, Caesar by the door, Mars near the window, Diana and Minerva flanking Wolfe's desk, Apollo patrolling the hallway, and Loyal doing his usual stint as early warning system near the front of the house. Wolfe studied Brennan for a long moment, then opened Vincent Ramirez's ledger and placed it on his desk between them. "Mr. Brennan," he began, his voice pitched at that particular frequency that suggested this was going to be thorough and possibly painful. "I've reviewed Mr. Ramirez's records extensively. They're admirably detailed, dates, amounts, locations, names of collection agents, but they lack context. They tell me what the Kings do, but not how they think. You spent 6 months inside their organization. I want to understand their philosophy." Brennan glanced at me, then back at Wolfe. "Their philosophy is simple: power through discipline. The Kings aren't like other gangs. They don't recruit criminals. They recruit soldiers." "Explain." "When I went undercover, I expected to find thugs, street toughs, the usual collection of petty criminals who'd graduated to organized crime. Instead, I found military veterans, former boxers, men with families and mortgages, men who showed up on time, followed orders without question, and treated the organization like a job." Wolfe's eyebrows rose fractionally. "They're professionals. More than that, they're believers. The Kings have a code written down, memorized, enforced. Every member knows it. Every member lives by it." "What code?" Brennan closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had shifted into something rehearsed, mechanical, like he was reciting from memory. "Loyalty above profit, discipline above strength, silence above freedom. The crown commands, the Kings obey, the territory is sacred, the family is eternal." The office was silent except for the scratch of my pen on paper. I was getting it all down, but something about those words, the formality, the religious overtone, sent a cold finger down my spine. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "That's not a gang code. That's a catechism." "Exactly. The Kings aren't just a criminal organization. They're a brotherhood, maybe even a cult. They've got rituals, hierarchies, and an ideology that goes beyond money. It's about control, order, creating something permanent in a world that's chaotic." "And this crown they mention?" "The leader, the founder, the person who built the organization 15 years ago and still runs it from the shadows. Nobody I met ever saw the crown. Nobody knew the crown's real name. But everyone believed in the crown absolutely." I stopped writing. "They believed in someone they'd never met?" "That's how it works. The mystery is part of the power. The crown is everywhere and nowhere, watching, judging, rewarding loyalty and punishing betrayal." Brennan opened his eyes. "I've been in the army, Mr. Wolfe. I've seen men follow orders because they were scared of their commanders. But the Kings? They followed orders because they believed their commander was infallible. Wolfe's expression had gone very still. How is that belief maintained? Through results. The Crown's decisions are always correct, always profitable, always one step ahead of the police, the competition, the federal government. Over 15 years, the Kings have never suffered a major loss, never had a significant arrest, never lost control of their territory. That kind of success breeds faith, or suggests corruption at very high levels. Both. The Crown has sources everywhere. Police, courts, City Hall, maybe even the federal government. But even more than that, the Crown is smart, cautious. Every operation is planned months in advance. Every contingency is anticipated. It's like playing chess against someone who can see 20 moves ahead. Wolfe was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair, then described the organizational structure. Brennan straightened up, slipping into what I recognized as lecture mode, probably how he'd briefed his captain 12 years ago before everything went sideways. The Kings are organized into 6 divisions, one for each block of their territory. Each division has 4 or 5 cells, and each cell has 5 to 7 men. That's roughly 150 to 200 active members total. Leadership? Each cell has a lieutenant. The lieutenants report to captains, 1 captain per division. The captains report to... He hesitated. Someone called the council. 3 people, maybe 4. And the council reports to the Crown. You never met anyone from the council? Never. I was a cell member, bottom of the hierarchy. We took orders from our Lieutenant Victor Straub. Straub took orders from someone above him, but he never told us who. That's the genius of the system. Compartmentalization. If one cell gets arrested, they can't betray the others because they don't know the others exist. Wolfe grunted. Did Mr. Straub ever mention names, locations where he received instructions, methods of communication? He used a payphone, always the same one, corner of 52nd and 10th. Every Friday at 8 p.m. he'd make a call. Short conversation, 2-3 minutes maximum. Then he'd come back and give us our assignments for the following week. Did you trace the number he called? I tried. It was a different number every time. Dead ends, all of them. Disconnected lines, empty offices. The Kings are careful about communication. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. What assignments did your cell receive? Collection, mostly. Picking up protection money from businesses on our designated route. Occasionally enforcement, roughing up someone who'd refused to pay, or delivering warnings to new businesses that they needed to join the neighborhood protection program. That was the euphemism they used. Made it sound like a service. Did you ever kill anyone during your 6 months? Brennan flinched. No. But I watched Straub kill a man, a restaurant owner named Giuseppe Romano, who'd threatened to go to the newspapers. Straub took him to an alley off 49th Street and beat him to death with a tire iron while the rest of us watched. When it was over, Straub looked at us and said, "The territory is sacred, remember that." And then we dumped the body in the river and went back to our regular jobs. Like it was nothing, like we'd just taken out the trash. His voice had dropped to barely a whisper. That's when I knew I had to get out. These weren't criminals playing at being organized. They were true believers, and I was in over my head. Wolfe studied him with those half-closed eyes that made you feel like you were being x-rayed. You said the Crown is smart. Give me an example. Brennan thought for a moment. 3 years before I went undercover, the feds launched a major investigation. They had wiretaps, informants, surveillance, the whole package. They were closing in. Then suddenly, all their informants recanted. Their wiretaps went silent. Their surveillance teams lost their targets. The investigation collapsed. Coincidence? The Crown knew. Somehow, the Crown knew everything the feds were doing before they did it. That's what I mean by smart. The organization has intelligence capabilities that rival law enforcement. Maybe better than law enforcement, since half the cops are on their payroll. Who is on their payroll? I can give you 4 names from when I was inside. Probably twice that many now. He rattled off names. 3 patrol officers and a desk sergeant. I wrote them down, though I suspected Wolfe had already memorized them. But those are just the small fish. The real corruption is higher up. Precinct captains who ignore complaints. Judges who dismiss cases. Prosecutors who suddenly lose evidence. Inspector Kramer? No. Kramer's clean. That's why he's never been promoted past inspector. He won't play ball. But his superiors, Different story. Wolfe absorbed this, then shifted direction. Tell me about recruitment. How do the Kings choose new members? Carefully. They target men with military backgrounds, clean records, and financial pressures. Family men are preferred. They're less likely to run. Each prospect is watched for months before contact is made. Then they're offered a job, steady pay, good benefits, loyalty to brothers in arms. Most men don't even know they're joining a criminal organization at first. It's presented as a neighborhood protection association or a mutual aid society. And when they discover the truth, by then, they're in too deep. They've taken money. They've attended meetings. They've participated in operations. The Kings own them. Plus, the pay is good. 2 to 3 times what a dock worker or delivery driver makes. Hard to walk away from that, especially if you've got kids to feed. How much did you earn during your 6 months? $400 a month. Cash. No taxes. No paperwork. I was supposed to report it to my captain, of course, but I kept it as evidence. Thought the serial numbers might be traceable. They weren't. The Kings launder everything through legitimate businesses. Wolfe glanced at the ledger. Mr. Ramirez documented some of those businesses. Restaurants, trucking companies, textile importers. Were you involved with any of them? I picked up money from a restaurant supply company on 50th Street. Mario's Fine Foods. The owner, Frank Delacroix, was one of the King's earliest clients. Been paying protection since 1938. By the time I was there, he'd stopped resisting. Just handed over the money twice a month like clockwork. I made a note. Frank Delacroix, another name for my list. Wolfe was relentless. Did you ever hear mention of Horace Zimmerman? Brennan frowned, thinking. The orchid grower? Not directly. But I remember Straub bragging about an arson job in 1949. Said they'd sent a message to someone who thought they were too good to pay. Burned his business to the ground and made it look like an accident. That could have been Zimmerman, who carried out the arson. Straub didn't say, but there was a guy in another cell, Felix Gunther, who specialized in fires. If anyone torched Zimmerman's greenhouses, it was probably him. Wolfe's massive hand clenched on the arm of his chair. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but I'd seen it before. It meant Wolfe was angry, truly, deeply angry, and working very hard to channel that anger into something productive. Where is Felix Gunther now? No idea. I've been out of the loop for 12 years. He could be dead, promoted, or running his own division for all I know. We'll find him. Wolfe's voice was flat, final. What else should I know about the King's operations? Brennan spent the next hour detailing everything he could remember. Collection routes, enforcement tactics, money laundering methods, communication protocols. It was a masterclass in organized crime, delivered by a man who'd paid for his knowledge with a career, a family, and most of his self-respect. By the time Fritz announced lunch at 1:30, I'd filled 20 pages in my notebook, and Wolfe had constructed what he called a preliminary framework of the King's organization. The framework was impressive and terrifying in equal measure. The Kings weren't just a gang. They were a shadow government operating inside Hell's Kitchen, with efficiency, discipline, and an almost religious devotion to their mysterious leader. And we were about to go to war with them. Lunch was Fritz's veal cutlets, cordon bleu, served with asparagus in butter sauce, and a salad that was more art than food. Dennis Halbert joined us, looking pale but steady. Brennan ate like a man who'd forgotten what real food tasted like. Wolfe consumed 3 cutlets in thoughtful silence. I was working on my second cutlet when the telephone rang. Fritz answered in the kitchen, then appeared in the dining room doorway. "Archie, it is for you, a man who will not give his name." I glanced at Wolfe, who nodded permission. I excused myself and took the call in the office. Goodwin speaking. The voice on the other end was male, young, and trying very hard to sound threatening. "You're the investigator asking questions about the Kings." "Among other things. Who's this?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is you need to stop. You and your boss. Stop asking questions. Stop bothering businesses. Stop pretending you can touch us." "Or what?" "Or people get hurt. Your boss, his cook, that drunk ex-cop you just moved in, the accountant you're hiding, everyone. We know where you are. We know what you're doing, and we can reach you anytime we want." I kept my voice level, conversational. "Interesting theory. Here's a better one. You're scared. The Kings have operated for 15 years without anyone challenging them effectively, and now someone is. That makes you nervous. Nervous people make mistakes. You think you're smart? I think I work for the smartest man in New York, and I think your organization just made a very stupid error. What error? Calling me. Now I know you're worried, which means we're getting close to something you don't want us to find. There was a pause, and I could almost hear the wheels turning. You've been warned, Goodwin. What happens next is on you. Tell your boss, sorry the Crown, that Nero Wolfe sends his regards, and his absolute certainty that we'll dismantle his organization within the month. I hung up before he could respond. When I returned to the dining room, Wolfe was finishing his third cutlet. Report. Anonymous threat. Male 20s, trying to sound tough, but mostly sounding scared. Said they know where we are, what we're doing, and can reach us any time. Standard intimidation playbook. Satisfactory. It means we've rattled them. Brennan looked less satisfied. You've rattled them? That's your takeaway? These people don't make idle threats, Mr. Wolfe. If they called, they're planning something. Undoubtedly, which is why we have precautions. Wolfe pushed back from the table. Archie, this afternoon you'll install additional locks on the service entrance. Fritz, ensure all ground floor windows remain closed and secured. Mr. Brennan, you and Mr. Halbert will remain inside the brownstone until further notice. The dogs, he paused as Caesar, who'd been lying near the dining room door, raised his head, will continue their patrol patterns. They're quite effective at detecting intruders. And if the Kings come anyway, Halbert asked, his voice thin, then they'll discover that this brownstone is considerably more difficult to breach than they anticipated. Wolfe rose from his chair with the ponderous dignity of a mountain, deciding to relocate. Gentlemen, we are engaged in a contest of wills. The Kings believe they can intimidate us into submission. We will demonstrate otherwise. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have orchids to attend to. He departed for the elevator and his plant rooms, leaving the three of us at the table with the remnants of lunch and the certainty that things were about to get significantly more dangerous. Brennan looked at me. Is he always like this? Like what? Completely fearless or completely insane? I can't tell which. Both, I said. Definitely both. But he's also never lost a case, never backed down from a fight, and never failed to deliver justice when someone's wronged him or his friends. The Kings killed an orchid grower. They have no idea what they've unleashed. I hope you're right. So do I. Now finish your cutlets. Fritz gets offended when people don't clean their plates, and you don't want to see him offended. We finished lunch in uneasy silence, and I spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing the brownstone's defenses while trying not to think about what the Kings were planning. Whatever it was, I had a feeling we'd find out soon. Thursday came with fog, the thick grey kind that turns Manhattan into a ghost city and makes you wonder if the buildings are real or just suggestions. I was up at 6:30, checking window locks and door seals, when Caesar found me in the front hall and made his low rumbling sound that meant something's wrong. What is it, boy? He moved to the front door, nose working, then looked back at me with those dark, intelligent eyes that had learned to communicate complex thoughts through posture alone. I checked the peephole. Nothing. Checked the street through the bulletproof windows. Empty except for fog. Checked. Then I saw it. On the front stoop, positioned precisely in the center so it couldn't be missed, was a photograph. Just one, weighted down by a rock so the fog wouldn't carry it away. I didn't open the door. Instead, I got the long-handled tool Fritz used for retrieving packages without exposing himself, extended it through the mail slot, and carefully hooked the photograph. It took 3 tries, but I got it inside without setting foot on the stoop. The photograph showed the brownstone. My brownstone, Wolfe's brownstone, taken from across the street, probably sometime in the last 24 hours. The windows were clearly visible. So was the front door. So was I, captured mid-stride as I'd walked out yesterday afternoon to install those additional locks. Someone had been watching. Someone had been close enough to document our movements, and someone wanted us to know it. I brought the photograph to Wolfe's desk and left it there for him to find when he came down at 9. Then I made coffee, tried not to think about how many photographs they might have, and waited for the genius to wake up and tell me this was all part of his plan. Wolfe appeared at 9 o'clock sharp, descended from the elevator, and crossed to his desk with the measured pace of a man who had no interest in rushing for any reason short of fire or flood. He saw the photograph immediately, picked it up, studied it for 10 seconds, and set it down. "They're competent," he said. "That's your analysis? They're competent? They've established surveillance capability, documented our movements, and delivered a message without exposing themselves to counteraction. Yes, competent. Also predictable." He rang for Fritz. "Coffee, please, and inform Mr. Brennan and Mr. Halbert that they are not to approach any windows today." Fritz appeared, saw the photograph, and went pale. "Mr. Wolfe, it's merely a photograph, Fritz, not a bomb, though I appreciate your concern for our safety. The coffee?" Fritz departed, still looking worried. Wolfe opened the morning papers, 3 of them, which he read simultaneously through some method I'd never quite understood, and began his daily ritual of catching up on the world's stupidity. I sat at my desk and stared at the photograph. The angle was good, professional even. Whoever took it knew what they were doing. The telephone rang at 9:15. I answered. Nero Wolfe's office. "Mr. Goodwin." The voice was different from yesterday's caller. Older, smoother, carrying the kind of authority that doesn't need to shout. "I trust you received our photograph." "Received and admired. Nice composition. You should consider a career in journalism. I'll pass your suggestion along. In the meantime, consider this a courtesy call. Last chance to walk away. Stop investigating. Send your house guests home. Return to your usual business of adultery cases and missing persons." "Can't do that. My boss has a stubborn streak about people who murder orchid growers." "Then your boss is going to get hurt. Along with everyone in that brownstone. We can reach you, Mr. Goodwin. Anytime, anywhere. The photograph proves it. It proves you can take pictures. Congratulations. You've mastered point-and-click technology. The question is, can you do anything else? You'll find out soon enough. Looking forward to it. But here's something for you to consider. Nero Wolfe doesn't respond well to threats. Neither do 5 Dobermans and a pit bull. You want to see what happens when you push us? Keep pushing. We'll be right here." I hung up. Again. Wolfe had lowered his newspapers and was watching me with an expression that might have been approval. "You're becoming quite belligerent in your old age." I learned from the best. What's our move? We accelerate. The Kings expect us to retreat. Instead, we advance. He pulled out Vincent Ramirez's ledger and flipped to a page marked with a strip of paper. "This afternoon you'll visit 3 businesses: Mario's Fine Foods on 50th Street, Callahan's Warehouse on 52nd, and the Anchor Tavern on 49th. All 3 are owned by men who've been paying the Kings for over a decade. All 3 are documented in the ledger as reliable sources of income." "And I'm supposed to do what?" "Exactly. Make them an offer. We'll protect them from the Kings in exchange for their testimony. No payment required, just their cooperation when the time comes." "Wolfe, these people are terrified. They won't testify even if we offer protection. They will if we give them hope and proof that the Kings can be beaten." He set down the ledger. "The King's power rests on 2 foundations, fear and inevitability. We're going to dismantle both, starting today." "How?" "By demonstrating that we cannot be intimidated, cannot be bought, and cannot be stopped. The photograph on our doorstep? That was supposed to frighten us. Instead, it confirms we're on the right path. They wouldn't threaten us unless we posed a genuine danger to their operations. Or they're about to burn down the brownstone. Unlikely. That would attract too much attention. The Kings prefer subtlety, threats, surveillance, selective violence against isolated targets. But we're not isolated. We're fortified, prepared, and increasingly informed about their organization." He picked up his coffee cup, which Fritz had delivered while we were talking. "Besides, they don't yet know about our other resources." "What other resources?" "Saul Panzer has been conducting his own investigation. He reports to me daily by telephone. By now, he's identified at least 6 current King's operatives, mapped their collection routes, and photographed 3 lieutenants. When the time comes to move against them, we'll have documentation." "You didn't mention this." "You didn't ask. Also, the fewer people who know Saul's activities, the safer he remains. The Kings are watching us, Archie, but they're not watching Saul." It was classic Wolfe, multiple operations running simultaneously, information compartmentalized, Everyone kept slightly off balance, including his own staff, infuriating and effective in equal measure. "Fine," I said, "I'll visit your 3 businesses, but if someone tries to kill me, I'm deducting ammunition costs from my salary." "Noted. Take the Marley and Archie." "Yeah? Be careful. The Kings are competent, as we've established. But competent people make one critical error. They assume everyone else is incompetent. Use that." I left the brownstone at 11, carrying the Marley .38 in my shoulder holster and the names of 3 businesses in my pocket. The fog had lifted slightly, replaced by the kind of grey overcast that makes October feel like the world's longest Monday. Mario's Fine Foods was first. It occupied a corner building on 50th Street, with large windows displaying canned goods, pasta, and imported Italian specialties. A bell chimed as I entered. The man behind the counter was 60 if he was a day, with white hair, a prominent nose, and the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to make sudden gestures. He looked up as I approached, and I saw the recognition in his eyes, not of me personally, but of what I represented, an outsider, a complication. "Help you?" His accent was Italian, worn smooth by decades in New York. "Mr. Delacroix?" "That's me." I pulled out my card and slid it across the counter. "Archie Goodwin. I'm a private investigator working for Nero Wolfe. I'd like to talk to you about the Kings of Keller Block." His expression went from cautious to terrified in about 2 seconds. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do. You've been paying them protection money since 1938. $200 a month in 1938. $400 now. That's over $60,000 in 16 years, Mr. Delacroix. That's a lot of money for nothing."
"It's not for nothing." The words came out before he could stop them. "Then, I'm not. You need to leave."
"I can help you. Wolfe can help you. We're investigating the Kings, and we're going to bring them down. But we need cooperation, testimony, someone willing to stand up and say, 'This is what they've done to me.'" "No." He backed away from the counter. No. You don't understand. They'll kill me. They'll burn my store. They'll hurt my family. I have 3 grandchildren, Mr. Goodwin. 3 beautiful grandchildren who visit me every Sunday. You think I'm going to risk them? The Kings have been bleeding you dry for 16 years. Don't you want it to stop? Of course I want it to stop. But wishing doesn't make it so. The police can't stop them. The FBI can't stop them. What makes you think one private detective can do what nobody else has managed? Because Nero Wolfe doesn't quit, and because the Kings made it personal when they murdered his friend. Delacroix stared at me for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry about his friend. I'm sorry about all of this, but I can't help you. I won't help you. Please leave my store and don't come back." "Mr. Delacroix." "Leave." I left. Strike 3, if we were counting. But something in Delacroix's eyes had caught my attention. Not just fear, but something else. Guilt, maybe. Or the deep exhaustion of a man who'd been carrying a heavy weight for too long. I filed it away and moved on to Callahan's warehouse. The warehouse was on 52nd Street, a grey brick building with loading docks and the smell of diesel fuel. I found the office in a corner of the main floor, where a man in his 40s sat at a battered desk doing paperwork. "Callahan?" He looked up. "That's me. You looking to rent storage space?" "Not exactly. I'm Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. I'm investigating—" "Stop right there." He held up a hand. "I know who Nero Wolfe is. I know what you're investigating. And I know I'm not talking to you." "How do you know what I'm investigating?" "Because 3 people called me this morning to warn me you'd be coming around asking questions about the Kings. They suggested I keep my mouth shut." "Who called?" "Doesn't matter. Point is, I'm not stupid. The Kings own this neighborhood. They own me. And they'll own you too if you keep pushing. We don't push easy. Then you'll die hard." He went back to his paperwork. "Close the door on your way out." I closed the door. Strike 4. The Anchor Tavern was last, and by the time I arrived, I was starting to see a pattern. The Kings had a communication network that would make Bell Telephone jealous. Every business I visited had been warned I was coming. Every owner had been told to refuse cooperation. And every conversation had ended with some variation of, "You're going to get yourself killed." The tavern was dark, smoky, and smelled like beer and bad decisions. The bartender was a woman mid-50s, red hair going grey, arms like a longshoreman. She took one look at me and said, "You're the detective." Word travels fast. Word travels at the speed of fear around here. You want a drink? Information would be better. Can't help you with that, but I'll pour you a beer on the house if you promise to leave afterward. I sat at the bar. She poured. I drank. It was better than I expected. How long have you been paying the Kings? I asked. 12 years, since I bought this place. They came around the second week I was open, explained how things worked, and I've been paying ever since. How much? Started at $150. Now it's $300. Twice a month, like clockwork. They're very reliable about collections. Her tone was bitter. What if you stopped paying? Then I'd be like Jimmy Kowalski. He owned a diner 2 blocks from here. Stopped paying in 1950. His diner burned down 3 days later. Jimmy moved to Philadelphia. Smart man. So you just keep paying? I keep paying. I keep my business. I keep breathing. It's not complicated, Mr. Goodwin. It's survival. I finished the beer. She was right. It wasn't complicated. It was just depressing. An entire neighborhood held hostage by fear, paying tribute to a shadow organization that nobody could touch. I left the tavern and walked back toward the Heron sedan, thinking hard about everything I'd learned. The Kings had reached every business owner before I could. They had communications, coordination, and enough fear capital to keep everyone silent. But they'd also revealed something important. They were worried. Worried enough to make calls. Worried enough to warn people. Worried enough to take photographs and leave them on doorsteps. Wolfe was right. We were getting close to something. I was half a block from the sedan when I noticed them. 2 men, 20s, heavy builds, wearing work jackets and caps. They'd been standing on the corner when I left the tavern, and now they were following me at a distance of maybe 30 yards. Not subtle, not trying to be. I kept walking, checking reflections in store windows. They kept following. When I turned the corner, they turned. When I slowed down, they slowed down. Message received. The Kings wanted me to know I was being watched. I reached the sedan, unlocked it, and drove back to West 35th Street while checking my rearview mirror every 30 seconds. The tail didn't follow. They'd made their point. When I got back to the brownstone, it was 2:15. Wolfe was in the office, reading. The dogs were stationed throughout the first floor in their usual defensive array. Everything looked normal. Except for the second photograph. This one had been delivered while I was gone, placed on the front stoop just like the first. Fritz had retrieved it using the same long-handled tool, and now it sat on Wolfe's desk. The photograph showed Saul Panzer. Saul, standing on a street corner in Hell's Kitchen, camera in hand, taking pictures of what I now recognized as one of the King's collection routes. The image was sharp, clear, and utterly damning. "They know about Saul," I said. Obviously, Wolfe didn't look up from his book. "You don't seem concerned." "Saul is capable. More to the point, he's expected this. When I assigned him surveillance duties, I told him to assume he'd be detected eventually. He's taken appropriate precautions." "What precautions?" "He's no longer in Hell's Kitchen. He's relocated his investigation to the waterfront, where the King's smuggling operations are based. Different territory, different personnel, different surveillance patterns. And if they find him there, then they'll confirm what we already know. The Kings are comprehensive, organized, and increasingly desperate to stop us." Wolfe finally looked up. "How went your afternoon?" I gave him the summary. 3 business owners, 0 cooperation, multiple warnings, and 1 obvious tail. He listened without comment, then nodded. "Satisfactory. You've confirmed the King's communication network is functional and their fear mechanism is intact. We now know what we're fighting against." "Do we know how to fight it?" "Not yet, but we will." He checked his watch. "It's nearly 3. I'm going to the plant rooms. This evening we'll have a conference. You, me, Mr. Brennan, Mr. Halbert, and Saul, who will join us by telephone. We need to synthesize everything we've learned and determine our next move. And if the Kings make their move first, then Caesar and his colleagues will earn their keep. Now, if you'll excuse me, my cattleyas are blooming and require attention." He departed for the elevator, leaving me alone with 2 photographs. One increasingly dangerous investigation, and the growing certainty that things were about to get much worse before they got better. Outside, the fog was returning. Inside, 6 dogs maintained their vigil, and somewhere in Hell's Kitchen, the Kings of Keller Block were planning their response to the stubborn detective who dared to challenge their 15-year reign. It was going to be an interesting evening. The conference began at 8 o'clock, after Fritz had served one of his more substantial dinners, roast duck with cherry sauce, wild rice and a salad that made vegetables seem like they had a purpose beyond moral superiority. We'd eaten in relative silence, the kind that settles over people who know they're waiting for something but aren't quite sure what. Now we were assembled in the office, Wolfe behind his desk, me at mine with my notebook, Thomas Brennan in the red leather chair, Dennis Halbert in one of the yellow ones, and Saul Panzer's voice coming through the telephone speaker that Wolfe had installed for exactly these kinds of remote consultations. The dogs had redistributed themselves with what I was beginning to recognize as tactical intelligence. Caesar and Mars flanked the office door. Apollo and Diana had taken up positions in the front hall, covering both the entrance and the stairs. Minerva had stationed herself near the windows, and Loyal's smallest but somehow most alert was doing his rounds. Kitchen, front room, office, repeat. Wolfe surveyed his assembled forces with the air of a general planning a campaign, which I supposed he was. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying that particular resonance that meant he'd been thinking hard and was about to share the results. "We are 3 days into this investigation. The Kings of Keller Block are aware of our activities. They've responded with surveillance, threats, and psychological pressure. This is expected. What matters now is our response." "Our response should be to run," Halbert said quietly. He'd been getting progressively more nervous as the day wore on, jumping at sounds, flinching when the dogs moved. "They found Saul. They know where we are. They know everything we're doing. We can't win this." "We can't win by running," Brennan countered. "I tried that. Spent 12 years running, drinking, hiding. The Kings didn't care. They let me rot because I wasn't worth killing. But the moment we stand up to them, that's when we become dangerous. That's when we matter. That's when we die." "Possibly," Wolfe interjected, his tone suggesting he found this speculation tedious. "But I've never found death to be a compelling reason to avoid doing what's right. Mr. Panzer, report." Saul's voice came through the speaker, steady and professional. "I've completed preliminary surveillance of the waterfront operations. The Kings control 3 warehouses on the west side docks, between 42nd and 45th Streets. They're smuggling, mostly European goods coming through irregular channels. Textiles, electronics, luxury items. I've documented 6 separate deliveries over the past 3 days, all during night hours, all using the same crew of stevedores. Leadership? I've identified one lieutenant, a man named Hugh Rafferty, ex-Navy, early 40s, ran supply operations during the war. He's methodical, careful, and very good at his job. The operations run like clockwork." "Is he the same Hugh Rafferty who served on the USS Indianapolis?" There was a pause. "How did you know that?" "I didn't. I guessed. Mr. Ramirez's ledger mentioned a Rafferty in connection with waterfront operations, and the Indianapolis survivors list is public record. I cross-referenced." Wolfe's expression suggested this was obvious to anyone with functioning brain cells. A man who survived that particular disaster would have both the discipline and the psychological fortitude required for the King's operations. "Has he been approached?" "Not yet. I'm still in observation phase. But Mr. Wolfe, there's something else. The waterfront operation isn't just smuggling. They're moving money, large amounts. I photographed 3 separate cash deliveries, briefcases, handled with extreme care, transferred directly from trucks to private vehicles. I couldn't follow without being detected, but the amounts appeared substantial. Money laundering? Or payments? The Kings collect protection money twice monthly across roughly 150 businesses. That's somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 per month. That money has to go somewhere. I think the waterfront is their processing center." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced across his middle mound, "which means the waterfront operation is critical infrastructure. Disrupt it, and we disrupt their entire financial system. Or we paint targets on our backs," I said. "The Kings have been patient so far, photographs, phone calls, surveillance, but if we hit their money, that's when they stop being patient." "Precisely, which is why we need leverage before we move." Wolfe looked at Brennan. "You said the Crown has sources everywhere. How are those sources maintained? How does the Crown ensure loyalty from police officers, judges, prosecutors? Brennan shifted in his chair. Money, mostly, but also information. The Kings collect dirt on anyone in a position of power. Affairs, gambling debts, illegal business dealings. They build files. When they need a favor, they ask nicely and remind you what they know. Most people cooperate. Where are these files kept? I don't know. Straub mentioned them once, said they were the Crown's insurance policy, but he never said where they were stored. Then we need to find them. Wolfe's gaze shifted to Halbert. Mr. Halbert, you worked with Vincent Ramirez. Did he mention anything about files, records beyond the financial ledgers? Halbert frowned, thinking. Vincent was paranoid about documentation. He said the Kings kept records of everything, not just money but operations, personnel, contacts. He thought it was their weakness. All that information in one place, if you could find it. Did he tell you where? No, but he said the Crown was obsessed with control. Everything centralized, everything documented. Vincent thought it was brilliant and stupid at the same time. Brilliant because it meant the Crown knew everything. Stupid because if those records were ever discovered, the entire organization would collapse. Wolfe was silent for a long moment, his eyes half closed. I recognized the look. He was assembling pieces, connecting patterns, building toward something. Finally, the Crown is not one person. We all stared at him. Explain, I said. Consider the evidence. The Kings have operated for 15 years with perfect operational security. No defections, no arrests, no significant failures. Simultaneously, they've maintained control over 6 square blocks, roughly 200 operatives, and an intelligence network that extends into police departments, courts, and federal agencies. This requires more than individual genius. It requires institutional structure. You're saying the Crown is multiple people? Brennan leaned forward. But everyone I talked to, everyone in the organization, they referred to the Crown singular, one person, and everyone was wrong. Or more accurately, everyone was seeing different aspects of the same system and assuming it was one person. Wolfe opened Vincent Ramirez's ledger and began flipping through pages. Look at the decision patterns, financial decisions, protection amounts, collection schedules, money laundering. These are made with economic sophistication. Enforcement decisions, violence, intimidation, target selection. These show tactical military thinking. Intelligence decisions, surveillance, information gathering, corruption management. These demonstrate understanding of institutional psychology. 3 different skill sets, 3 different decision-making styles. The council, Saul said through the speaker. Brennan mentioned a council of 3 or 4 people between the captains and the Crown. Not between. The council is the Crown. 3 people, possibly 4, operating as a collective leadership. That's why no one has identified the Crown, because they've been looking for one person when they should have been looking for a committee. I thought about this. That would explain the communication structure. Cell lieutenants report to captains, captains report to council members coordinate among themselves. Everyone sees part of the picture, but nobody sees all of it. Exactly. And it means our task is more complex than anticipated. We're not looking for one mastermind, we're looking for 3 or 4 highly intelligent, highly disciplined individuals who've managed to function as a seamless unit for 15 years. That's impossible, Halbert said. People fight. They disagree. 3 leaders would tear the organization apart, unless they were bound by something stronger than ambition, philosophy, ideology, a shared goal that transcends individual power. Wolfe looked at Brennan. You said the Kings have a code. Recite it again. Brennan closed his eyes and repeated. Loyalty above profit, discipline above strength, silence above freedom. The Crown commands, the Kings obey. The territory is sacred. The family is eternal. The family is eternal, Wolfe repeated. Not the organization, not the Crown, the family. Mr. Brennan, is it possible the council members are related? Actual family? Brennan's eyes snapped open. Jesus, I never. Vincent Straub mentioned brothers once. I thought he meant brothers in arms, like a military unit. But what if he meant actual brothers? Or siblings? A family business, quite literally. It would explain the loyalty, the coordination, the longevity. Families endure when organizations fragment. The office was silent except for the sound of Caesar shifting position by the door. Outside, a car passed on 35th Street. Inside, we were all processing the implications. If Wolfe was right, if the Crown was a family, then we weren't just fighting a criminal organization. We were fighting a dynasty. So how do we identify them? I asked. We start with the waterfront. Mr. Panzer, continue surveillance of Hugh Rafferty. Document his contacts, his routines, his vulnerabilities. Archie, tomorrow you'll return to Hell's Kitchen. Choose one business owner, the weakest one, the one most likely to break, and apply sustained pressure. Offer protection, money, immunity, whatever is necessary. We need someone to testify. And if they refuse, then we manufacture evidence. We've been operating defensively, allowing the Kings to dictate the terms of engagement. That changes now. We attack. Attack how? Brennan asked. Wolfe smiled, thin and cold. We give them a target they can't ignore. Tomorrow evening, I'm placing an advertisement in the evening edition of every major newspaper. The crown will fall. The Kings will scatter. Justice comes for Keller Block. Signed, Nero Wolfe. The silence that followed was profound. Finally, I said, that's the most expensive suicide note I've ever heard. It's a challenge. The Kings have operated in shadow for 15 years. We're dragging them into light. They'll have to respond. And when they respond, they'll make mistakes. They'll try to kill you, Halbert said, his voice rising. They'll burn down this brownstone. They'll try, Wolfe agreed. And they'll discover that this brownstone is considerably more difficult to assault than they imagine. We have fortifications, trained guards, and more importantly, we have information they don't know we possess. The initiative is shifting, gentlemen. The question is, are you prepared to see this through? Brennan answered first. I'm in. I've run for 12 years. I'm done running. Halbert took longer, but eventually nodded. Vincent was my friend. If you can bring down the people who killed him, yes, I'm in. Mr. Panzer, you know I am. Saul's voice came through the speaker. But Mr. Wolfe, be careful. Challenging them publicly is dangerous. It's also brilliant, which is what worries me. The Kings will respond with everything they have. Let them. Wolfe checked his watch. It's 8:45. Fritz will serve coffee momentarily. After that, I suggest everyone get some rest. Tomorrow will be eventful. The conference was over. Brennan and Halbert departed for their rooms. Saul signed off with a promise to call if anything developed overnight. Fritz appeared with coffee and pastries that were probably sinful in several religions. I stayed in the office drinking coffee and watching Wolfe work through Vincent Ramirez's ledger one more time. You really think we can beat them? I asked. I think we can expose them, which amounts to the same thing. He didn't look up from the ledger. The King's power is based on invisibility and fear. Remove those and they're just criminals who can be arrested like any others. And if we can't remove them, then we die trying. But at least we'll die having done something worth dying for. He turned a page. Horace Zimmerman deserved better than to burn alive for protecting his orchids. I intend to give him that better outcome, retroactively. By starting a war. By finishing one, the Kings started it when they burned those green houses. I'm simply providing the conclusion. I went to bed around 11, knowing I wouldn't sleep well but hoping for a few hours of rest before tomorrow's excitement. My room on the 3rd floor was comfortable, secure, and equipped with a 28 in the nightstand drawer for guests who arrived uninvited. I was drifting off when I heard it. Caesar's low warning bark, cut short but unmistakable. I was out of bed and armed in under 5 seconds, moving down the stairs in the dark. The brownstone's night lights provided minimal illumination, enough to avoid furniture, not enough to see clearly. Caesar was at the front door, rigid with attention. Mars had joined him. Diana was at the window, nose pressed to the bulletproof glass. Apollo and Minerva were on the stairs, blocking access to the upper floors, and Loyal was in the office doorway, looking at me with an expression that said, trouble, outside, multiple threats. I moved to the window, staying to the side, and looked out. 3 men, standing across the street, not hiding, not trying to blend in, just standing there in the pool of streetlight, looking at the brownstone. One of them was holding something. I couldn't see what, but the way he held it carefully, with both hands, suggested it was either fragile or dangerous, or both. I went to the front door and double-checked the locks. All secure. Then I checked the service entrance, the basement door, the rear exit. Everything locked, bolted, secured. By the time I got back to the front window, the 3 men were gone. But they'd left something behind. In the middle of the street, directly in front of the brownstone, was a burning effigy. Not large, maybe 3 feet tall, but clearly meant to represent a person. The flames were bright in the fog, casting dancing shadows on the wet pavement. And pinned to the effigy's chest was a sign. Even from the second-floor window I could read it. "This is your only warning." I watched it burn for 30 seconds, then went downstairs and called the fire department. They arrived within 10 minutes, put out the flames, and asked if I wanted to file a report. "No," I said. "Just a prank. Halloween's coming." They didn't believe me, but they left anyway. I secured the house, told the dogs they'd done well, and went back to bed with the certainty that tomorrow was going to be worse than I'd anticipated. The Kings had made their move. Now it was our turn. Friday morning arrived with the burning effigy still etched in my memory, and the smell of smoke still clinging to the front stoop. I was up at 6, checking the street from every window, finding nothing except the charred patch of pavement where the Kings had delivered their message. Fritz found me in the kitchen at 6:30, making coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He looked at the char marks visible through the window and said nothing, just began preparing breakfast with the kind of focused intensity people use when they're worried, but don't want to show it. "Fritz," I said, "if things get bad, they will not. But if they do, Mr. Wolfe has never lost. He cracked eggs with more force than necessary. He will not start now." I hoped he was right, but hope doesn't stop bullets, and it doesn't put out fires. Wolfe descended at 9 o'clock, surveyed the breakfast Fritz had prepared, shirred eggs, sausages and toast points, and sat down to eat as if burning effigies were a normal part of Friday mornings in Manhattan. "The advertisement?" he asked between bites. "Submitted to all 6 papers last night by telephone. It'll run in this evening's editions. Cost us $240. I paused. Money well spent on our own obituary notice. Dramatic, but inaccurate. "We're not dying, Archie. We're drawing them out." He finished his eggs and reached for the morning papers, which Fritz had ironed and arranged by publication date. "The Kings have operated in shadow. We're forcing them into light. When they emerge, they'll be vulnerable, or we'll be dead. That's always possible, but I find it unlikely. The Kings are cautious. Last night's effigy was theatre, not genuine threat. If they wanted us dead, they would have attempted entry rather than leaving props in the street." Comforting. I thought so. The telephone rang at 9:15. I answered, half expecting another threat. Instead, "Goodwin, it's Lon Cohen. What the hell is Wolfe doing?" "Morning, Lon. What am I supposed to have done?" "The advertisement. The crown will fall. The Kings will scatter. Justice comes for Keller Block. Every newspaper in the city is running it. My editor wants to know if Wolfe's lost his mind, or if this is some kind of publicity stunt." "Neither. It's a formal declaration of intent. It's suicide. The Kings don't respond well to public challenges, Archie. They respond with violence. You need to tell Wolfe. Tell him yourself. He's right here." I handed the phone to Wolfe, who accepted it with the enthusiasm of a man being offered a dead fish. "Mr. Cohen." "Yes. The advertisement is genuine. No, I haven't lost my mind. Yes, I'm aware of the risks. No, I will not retract it. The Kings of Keller Block have operated with impunity for 15 years. That ends now. Good day." He hung up and returned to his newspapers. The phone rang again immediately. This time it was Inspector Kramer, who dispensed with pleasantries and launched directly into what I recognized as an extended lecture on stupidity, arrogance, and the various creative ways the Kings were going to kill us all. Wolfe listened for approximately 30 seconds, then interrupted. "Inspector, your concern is noted and appreciated. However, I have no intention of retreating. The advertisement stands. If you wish to be useful, I suggest you position officers near the brownstone this evening. The Kings will attempt some form of response, and having police presence might discourage their more violent impulses. Good day." He hung up again. "You're making friends everywhere," I observed. "I'm making progress. There's a difference." He checked his watch. "It's 9:30. This afternoon, when the evening editions hit the streets, the Kings will know we've challenged them publicly. They'll have several options: ignore us, which would damage their reputation, threaten us more directly, which we're prepared for, or attempt to discredit us, which requires them to emerge from shadow. Any of those options serves our purpose, which is to force them into the open, to make them react rather than act. Reactive people make mistakes, Archie. We're going to exploit those mistakes until we identify the Crown's true membership and dismantle their organization. And if they react by burning down the brownstone, then we'll have advance warning, significant defensive capabilities, and 6 highly trained dogs who are quite effective at deterring arsonists. Now I have orchids to attend to. You have witnesses to interview. I suggest we both attend to our respective duties. He rose and departed for the plant rooms, leaving me with cold coffee and the growing certainty that we'd just escalated from surveillance games to genuine warfare. I spent the morning reinforcing our defenses, additional locks on the service entrance, a new buzzer system connected to the plant rooms so Wolfe could be alerted without leaving his orchids, emergency supplies in the basement, food, water, first aid kit, ammunition, and a series of pre-positioned fire extinguishers throughout the brownstone, because if the Kings were going to try burning us out, I wanted options. The dogs watched my preparations with interest. Caesar followed me from room to room, occasionally sniffing at new equipment. Diana had appointed herself supervisor of the fire extinguishers, touching her nose to each one as I installed it. And Loyal, ever practical, had taken up position near the front windows, maintaining his self-appointed role as the brownstone's early warning system. At noon, Dennis Halbert found me in the basement, securing the coal chute that hadn't been used in 20 years but represented a potential entry point. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, his voice tight, "I've been thinking about the advertisement, about what happens when the Kings see it. And I think I should leave, go somewhere else. I'm putting everyone in danger by being here. You're in danger everywhere. At least here you've got bulletproof windows and armed guards." Armed with what? A pistol? Against an organization with 200 members? Against an organization that's about to panic. Wolfe's right about reactive people, Halbert. The Kings have been comfortable for 15 years. Now someone's publicly challenging them. They're going to make mistakes. When they do, we'll be ready. And if they don't make mistakes, then we make them make mistakes. That's what Wolfe does. He pushes, prods, and irritates people until they react stupidly. It's basically his entire methodology. Halbert didn't look convinced, but he nodded and retreated upstairs. I finished securing the coal chute and checked my watch. 1:30. The evening editions would hit the streets in about 4 hours. I had time for one more run at Hell's Kitchen, one more attempt to crack the wall of fear that protected the Kings. This time, I was going to try a different approach. Frank Delacroix's grocery store looked the same as it had on Wednesday. Narrow, dark, smelling of imported foods and old wood. But Delacroix himself looked different, older, more tired, like he'd been carrying something heavy and was starting to buckle under the weight. The bell chimed as I entered. He looked up from restocking a shelf, saw me, and his shoulders sagged. "Mr. Goodwin, I told you I couldn't help you." "I know, but I'm not here to ask for help. I'm here to give you information." That caught his attention. "What information?" I pulled out one of the photographs the Kings had left on our doorstep, the one showing Saul Panzer conducting surveillance. The Kings are watching us, they know we're investigating, and they're scared. Scared enough to photograph our operatives, scared enough to threaten us, scared enough to burn an effigy outside our door last night. His eyes widened. They burned. An effigy, not a person, not yet. But it means we're getting close to something they don't want us to find. And when we find it, Mr. Delacroix, their organization is going to collapse. The question is, do you want to be part of that collapse, or do you want to be on the side that brings them down? I told you, I have grandchildren. The Kings have files, blackmail material on police officers, judges, politicians. Vincent Ramirez documented everything in his ledger. When we expose those files, every corrupt cop and bought judge is going to be arrested. The King's protection will evaporate, and everyone who's been paying them for years will finally be free. He set down the can he'd been holding. "You sound very certain." "I work for Nero Wolfe. He's never failed to solve a case. He's never backed down from a challenge. And he's never let criminals escape justice. The Kings killed his friend. They're going to pay for it. The only question is how much damage they do before we stop them." Delacroix was silent for a long moment, staring at the photograph. Then, "What do you need from me?" "Testimony. When the time comes, when we have the evidence, when the arrests start, I need you to stand up in court and say, yes, they extorted me. Yes, they threatened me. Yes, they've been bleeding me dry for 16 years. Can you do that? If you can guarantee my safety, my family's safety, I can guarantee that the Kings won't exist to threaten you. Wolfe will destroy them, completely. But I need your word that when we call, you'll testify." He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Risk versus reward, fear versus hope, 16 years of paying versus the possibility of freedom. Finally, "All right, when you call, I'll testify. But Mr. Goodwin, yeah, you better be as good as you say you are, because if you fail, the Kings will kill me, and my family, and probably you too." Noted. Keep this conversation to yourself. Don't tell anyone, not your family, not your friends, especially not any of the other business owners. The Kings have informants everywhere. I know, that's how they've survived so long. I left with the first real victory of the investigation. One witness, willing to testify, contingent on our success. It wasn't much, but it was a crack in the wall, and cracks, if you apply enough pressure, become fractures. I got back to the brownstone at 3:45. The afternoon mail had arrived, and Fritz had placed it on Wolfe's desk along with a note. 10 threatening phone calls since noon. I stopped answering after the 7th. Wolfe descended from the plant rooms at 4 o'clock, his expression suggesting the cattleyas had bloomed satisfactorily and the world was therefore proceeding according to plan. He noticed the note, grunted, and settled into his chair. "Threats are progress," he announced. "It means the advertisement is having its intended effect. Or it means we've angered people with guns and a tendency toward arson. That too. Did you make progress with the witnesses?" 1. Frank Delacroix. He'll testify when we're ready. Conditional on our success, of course. Naturally, no one testifies against the Kings until they're certain the Kings are defeated. We'll need at least 3 more witnesses before we can approach the district attorney with a viable case. 3 more business owners willing to risk their lives. 3 more people with courage. They exist, Archie. We simply need to find them and provide appropriate motivation. He pulled out Vincent Ramirez's ledger and began marking pages with strips of paper. "This evening will be interesting. The newspaper advertisement will reach the streets at 5. By 6, the Kings will know we've challenged them publicly. By 7, they'll have decided on a response. By 8, he paused. By 8, we'll discover whether they're as rational as I suspect, or as violent as everyone fears. My money's on violent. Then we'll be prepared for violence. Fritz has prepared a cold supper. We'll eat early, then position ourselves defensively. You'll cover the front of the house. Mr. Brennan will cover the rear. I'll remain in the office where I can coordinate. The dogs will patrol as usual. If the Kings attempt entry, we'll demonstrate that this brownstone is considerably more defensible than they imagine. And if they don't attempt entry, if they just surround the place and burn it down, then we'll use the rear exit, retreat to our backup position, and continue the investigation from a hotel. I've already arranged accommodations at the Ritz under an assumed name. Fritz has packed emergency bags for all of us." I stared at him. "When did you do this?" "Last night, after the effigy. I'm not suicidal, Archie, merely determined. There's a difference." At 4:30, Saul called with an update. Hugh Rafferty had received visitors at the waterfront warehouse. 3 men, all matching the descriptions of King's lieutenants from Brennan's reports. They'd met for 40 minutes, then departed in separate vehicles. Saul had photographed everything. "They're coordinating," Wolfe said after Saul hung up, "gathering their leadership, planning their response to our challenge, or planning our funerals." "Archie, your pessimism is noted but unhelpful. Please check the ammunition supply and ensure all firearms are loaded." I checked. We had enough ammunition for a small war, which was either reassuring or terrifying depending on your perspective. The Marley .38 in my shoulder holster, Wolfe's Webley .32 in his desk drawer, and 3 additional weapons secured in the safe, plus whatever Brennan might be carrying. Ex-cops tended to stay armed. At 5 o'clock, Fritz served an early dinner. cold chicken, potato salad, and bread that was still warm from the oven. We ate quickly, efficiently, without the usual conversation. Even Wolfe was subdued, though he managed 3 helpings of chicken before declaring himself satisfied. At 5:30, the first evening edition arrived. Fritz had arranged for delivery of all 6 newspapers. I spread them on Wolfe's desk. The advertisement was there, exactly as specified, in each paper. The crown will fall, the kings will scatter. Justice comes for Keller Block. Nero Wolfe. Below it, Wolfe had included the brownstone's address and telephone number. An invitation, a challenge, a declaration of war. Well, I said, looking at the 6 identical advertisements, we've done it now. Indeed we have. Wolfe checked his watch. It's 5:35. I estimate we have 90 minutes before the kings respond. Use that time wisely. I spent it checking locks, positioning fire extinguishers, and explaining to the dogs that tonight was going to be different. Caesar seemed to understand. He'd shifted into a more alert posture, moving through the brownstone with purpose. Mars had abandoned his usual post by the office door and was patrolling the hallway. Diana and Apollo had stationed themselves at opposite ends of the first floor, creating overlapping fields of observation. Minerva was on the stairs, blocking access to the upper floors, and Loyal was at the front window, nose pressed to the bulletproof glass, watching the street with the intensity of a radar operator tracking incoming bombers. At 6:15, the first car arrived. It parked across the street, engine running, 2 men visible in the front seats. They didn't get out, didn't approach, just sat there, watching. At 6:30, a second car arrived, parked behind the first, 2 more men. At 6:45, a third car, then a fourth. By 7 o'clock, there were 6 cars on West 35th Street, 12 men total, all watching the brownstone with the focused attention of predators waiting for their moment. I reported to Wolfe, who was reading in the office as if nothing unusual was happening. 12 men, I said, 6 cars, all just sitting there. Psychological pressure. They want us to know they're there. They want us to feel surrounded. It's quite effective, actually. Glad you appreciate the craftsmanship. What do we do? Nothing. We wait. The kings are deciding whether to escalate. If they're rational, they'll realize that assaulting a private residence in Manhattan will bring too much attention. If they're emotional, they'll attack anyway, and we'll defend ourselves. He turned a page. Either way, we've achieved our goal, forcing them to react. At 7:15, Inspector Kramer arrived. His unmarked car pulled up behind the 6th King's vehicle, and he got out alone, walking past the 6 cars with the kind of deliberate stride that said, "I'm a cop, I'm armed, and I'm not impressed." The men in the cars watched him but didn't move. Kramer climbed the brownstone's front steps and rang the bell. Once, firm. I checked the peephole, confirmed it was him, and opened the door. Caesar and Mars flanked me, not threatening, but definitely present. Kramer looked at the dogs, then at me. "You've got company." We noticed. "I've got 4 patrol cars stationed within 2 blocks. If shooting starts, they'll respond. But Goodwin, this is insane. You've got a dozen armed men outside. This ends badly. Come in and tell Wolfe that." He followed me to the office. Wolfe looked up from his book. "Inspector, have you come to admire our siege? I've come to tell you to stand down. The kings aren't going to attack. Not directly. But they will make your life hell. They'll follow you everywhere, threaten your clients, destroy your reputation. They're good at indirect warfare. Then we'll engage in direct warfare. I prefer it. Wolfe?" "Inspector, I appreciate your concern, but my decision is made. The kings have operated with impunity for 15 years. That ends tonight. Either they'll attack and be arrested, or they'll retreat and lose face. Either outcome serves justice." Kramer stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're the stubbornest son of a bitch I've ever met. I consider that a compliment." It wasn't meant as one. He turned to leave, paused at the door. "I'll keep the patrol cars in position. But if this goes sideways, Wolfe, I'm arresting everyone. You, them, the whole circus." "Understood. Good evening, Inspector." Kramer left, and we returned to our vigil. At 8 o'clock, the telephone rang. I answered. Nero Wolfe's office. The voice was the same smooth authority I'd heard before. Older, controlled, dangerous. Mr. Wolfe has made a mistake. And he makes several a day. Which one concerns you? The advertisement. The public challenge. We've been patient with you. Given you warnings. Offered you chances to walk away. But patience has limits. So does our tolerance for murder, extortion, and arson. Tell the Crown, or the Council, or whoever's actually running your organization, that Nero Wolfe doesn't negotiate with criminals. We're going to expose you, arrest you, and destroy everything you've built. The only question is whether you make it easy or hard. You have until midnight. Retract the advertisement. Send your witnesses home. Stop investigating. If you comply, we'll consider this a misunderstanding. If you don't, he paused. Well, accidents happen. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Midnight, Mr. Goodwin. Choose wisely. He hung up. I relayed the conversation to Wolfe, who listened without expression. Midnight, he said when I finished. 4 hours. They're giving us time to reconsider, which suggests they're hoping to avoid direct confrontation. Interesting. Interesting. They just threaten to kill us if we don't back down. Yes, but they set a deadline. Deadlines create pressure, but also boundaries. They won't act before midnight. It would violate their own terms, which means we have 4 hours to make progress elsewhere. What progress? We're surrounded by armed men. Not all of us. He picked up the telephone and dialed. Mr. Panzer, it's Wolfe. I need you to visit Hugh Rafferty. Tonight. Make him an offer he can't refuse. The hours between 8 and midnight have a particular quality when you're surrounded by armed men who've promised to kill you. Time stretches. Every sound becomes significant. Every shadow suggests movement. And the clock on the wall ticks with the rhythm of a countdown. I positioned myself in the front room, where I could watch the street through the bulletproof windows without being clearly visible from outside. The 6 cars remained in place, engines occasionally running to keep the occupants warm. Occasionally, one of the men would get out, stretch, smoke a cigarette, then return to his vehicle. They were professional about it. No obvious weapons, no threatening gestures, just presence. Wait. The implicit message, we're here, we're patient, and we're not leaving. Wolfe remained in the office, reading. He'd moved on from orchid taxonomy to a history of Montenegro. Light reading for him, probably incomprehensible for anyone else. The book was in French, which he read as easily as English, and occasionally he'd grunt in approval or disagreement with whatever the author was claiming about his homeland. Thomas Brennan had stationed himself at the rear of the brownstone, covering the service entrance and the small courtyard that backed onto the adjacent building. He'd armed himself with a pistol he'd produced from somewhere. Ex-cops always had guns stashed away, and settled into a position that suggested military training. Every 15 minutes he'd make a circuit through the basement, checking windows and doors, then return to his post. Dennis Halbert had retreated to the south bedroom, where I'd last seen him sitting on the bed. Vincent Ramirez's ledger open on his lap, reading and rereading entries, as if they might reveal something new. Fear had settled over him like a blanket, but underneath it was something harder, determination maybe, or just the realization that running wasn't an option anymore. Fritz was in the kitchen, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, and preparing food nobody wanted. It was his way of coping, keeping busy, maintaining routines, pretending that tonight was just another evening in a brownstone that happened to be under siege. The dogs had organized themselves with tactical precision that would have impressed a general. Caesar commanded the front hall, positioned so he could see both the entrance and the office door. Mars patrolled the perimeter, moving from room to room on a schedule I couldn't quite discern, but which never left any area unobserved for more than 3 minutes. Apollo and Diana had split coverage of the ground floor, one on each side of the central staircase. Minerva maintained her post on the stairs themselves, blocking access to the upper floors, and Loyal had appointed himself advanced scout, moving between the front windows with his nose constantly working, processing scents and sounds invisible to human perception. At 8:30 the telephone rang again. This time it was Saul, calling from a payphone somewhere in the waterfront district. I'm in position outside Rafferty's warehouse. He's still inside, working late. I count 3 other men with him, probably subordinates. How do you want me to approach? Wolfe took the call in the office. I listened on the extension. Directly, Wolfe said, walk in the front door. Announce yourself. Tell him you have a proposition that will make him very rich or very dead, and the choice is his. That's subtle. Subtlety is for people with time. We have 3 hours and 28 minutes until midnight. Mr. Rafferty needs to understand the stakes immediately. And if he refuses, then photograph him refusing and withdraw. But I don't think he'll refuse. Hugh Rafferty survived the sinking of the Indianapolis. He watched 900 men die over 4 days in shark-infested waters. A man who's experienced that kind of trauma has 2 options: become paralyzed by fear or become immune to it. Mr. Rafferty chose the latter, which means he's rational enough to recognize a good deal when he hears one. What's the deal? $5,000, immunity from prosecution, and safe passage out of New York. In exchange, he provides everything he knows about the King's waterfront operations and identifies at least one member of the Crown Council. I heard Saul whistle softly through the phone. That's a lot of money. It's an investment. Mr. Rafferty is a lieutenant, close enough to see the structure, distant enough to betray it without guilt. Men in that position are always the most likely to turn. Make the offer. Call me back within the hour. Saul hung up. Wolfe returned to his book, and I returned to watching the street, where nothing had changed except the positions of the cigarette smokers. At 9 o'clock, one of the cars left. Just drove away. No fanfare, no explanation. The remaining 5 cars adjusted their positions slightly, filling the gap. Shift change, Brennan said, appearing in the front room. They're rotating personnel. Means they're planning to maintain the siege for a while. Probably through the night, maybe into tomorrow. Wolfe gave them a midnight deadline. Wolfe gave them a deadline. They don't have to honor it. Could be a psychological tactic. Make us think we're safe until midnight, then hit us at 11:45 when we've relaxed slightly. Cheerful thought. I spent 6 months with these people. They're smart, they're patient, and they don't play by anyone's rules except their own. He checked his watch. 3 hours. If they're going to make a move, it'll be soon. They'll want time to execute and withdraw before the patrol cars Kramer mentioned can respond. He was right, and we both knew it. The question was, what move would they make? At 9:30 we got our answer. The telephone rang. I answered in the office, Wolfe listening from his desk. Mr. Goodwin, the smooth voice again, the one that had called earlier. It's 9:30. You have 2.5 hours remaining. We wanted to give you an incentive to reconsider. What kind of incentive? Look out your front window, 2nd floor, the study. I went upstairs, Wolfe following with surprising speed for a man of his bulk. We entered the study, a small room overlooking the street, rarely used except for storage. From this angle, we could see something we'd missed from the ground floor. A man on the roof of the building across the street. He was lying flat, barely visible except for the glint of metal beside him. A rifle, high-powered, from the size of it, with a scope. The man wasn't aiming. Not yet. Just lying there, waiting. Do you see him? The voice asked through the phone. I'd carried upstairs. We see him. That's a Barrett M82, 50 caliber sniper rifle. Effective range, 1,800 meters. Your brownstone is approximately 40 meters away. At that distance, Mr. Sullivan could put a round through your bulletproof windows and hit a target the size of a playing card. He's quite skilled. Sullivan. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Michael Sullivan, former Marine Corps scout sniper, deployed in the Pacific? There was a pause. You've done your research. I've read the service records of every military veteran in Manhattan who might have joined a criminal organization. Mr. Sullivan has impressive credentials. 214 confirmed kills, 12 decorations for valor, honorably discharged in 1945. It's a shame he's wasting his talents working for you. He's well compensated, as are all our people. Unlike you, Mr. Wolfe, we take care of our family. Family? Wolfe's tone was sharp. An interesting choice of words, but we'll discuss that later. What's your point with Mr. Sullivan's demonstration? The point is that your defenses are adequate against direct assault but irrelevant against precision fire. Mr. Sullivan can wait on that roof until dawn if necessary. Eventually someone will pass by a window. Your cook, perhaps. Or your assistant. Or you, Mr. Wolfe. One shot. That's all it takes. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Bulletproof windows were designed to stop handgun rounds, maybe even rifle rounds from certain angles. But a 50 caliber round from 40 meters? That was designed to disable vehicles. It would go through our windows like they were paper. Wolfe's expression didn't change. You're bluffing. Firing a .50 caliber rifle in Manhattan would bring every police officer in the city. You'd lose Mr. Sullivan, lose the strategic advantage, and gain nothing except murder charges. Unless we make it look like an accident. Gas explosion, perhaps. Your brownstone is old, Mr. Wolfe. Old buildings have old pipes. Old pipes leak. Tragic, really. But these things happen. Now you're threatening arson. Your repertoire is expanding. We're demonstrating options. Midnight is your deadline. 2 hours and 26 minutes. Use them wisely. The line went dead. Wolfe and I stood in the study, looking at the sniper on the roof across the street. He hadn't moved, hadn't even shifted position, just lying there, patient and professional, waiting for orders. Well, I said, this is new. Indeed, they've escalated beyond surveillance and psychological pressure to genuine tactical positioning. It suggests desperation, which is promising, but it also presents logistical challenges. He moved away from the window. We need to adjust our defensive strategy. All personnel will remain on the ground floor or in the basement. No one approaches any exterior window, and we need to contact Inspector Kramer immediately. And tell him what? That there's a sniper on a roof. He'll think we're paranoid. Tell him there's an armed man on a roof across from our brownstone. That's a crime. Let him investigate. I made the call. Kramer didn't sound happy. He sounded like a man who'd been expecting disaster and was now watching it arrive right on schedule. But he promised to send officers to investigate the roof. By the time I hung up, Wolfe had assembled everyone on the ground floor. Brennan, Halbert, Fritz and me. The dogs had rearranged themselves around the group, forming a protective perimeter that was either reassuring or ominous, depending on your perspective. Gentlemen, Wolfe began, his voice carrying that particular authority that made you pay attention even when you didn't want to. The situation has developed in predictable ways. The Kings have surrounded us, positioned a sniper and delivered threats. They expect us to capitulate. We will not. Instead, we'll wait for two developments. First, Inspector Kramer's response to the sniper, which should arrive within 15 minutes. Second, Mr. Panzer's report from his meeting with Hugh Rafferty, which should arrive within the hour. When both those developments have occurred, we'll have leverage. Leverage for what? Halbert's voice was thin, strained. They've got us trapped. They've got a sniper. They've threatened to blow up the building. What leverage do we have? Information. Proof. The ability to destroy their organization if they harm us. Wolfe's smile was cold. The Kings believe they're hunting us. They're wrong. We're hunting them, and we're very close to our quarry. At 9:45, 3 patrol cars arrived on West 35th Street, lights flashing. Officers emerged and began clearing the building across the street. Within 10 minutes, they'd located Michael Sullivan on the roof, no longer prone with his rifle but sitting peacefully, smoking a cigarette, the weapon secured in a case beside him. I watched through binoculars from the ground floor, staying well back from the windows. The officers were talking to Sullivan. He was talking back, calm and conversational. After 5 minutes, one of the officers made a radio call. After 10 minutes, they were shaking Sullivan's hand and leaving. I called Kramer. What just happened? Sullivan's got a permit for the rifle. Says he's a security consultant conducting a threat assessment on your building. Says you hired him. The officers checked his credentials, found everything in order, and left. That's insane. We didn't hire him. I know that. But he's got paperwork, licenses, documentation. Unless you want to file a formal complaint, which would require you to go on record, appear in court, and expose yourself to cross-examination, there's nothing I can do. So he just gets to stay up there. He says he'll be done with his assessment by midnight. After that, he'll pack up and leave. Kramer's tone was grim. Wolfe's playing a dangerous game, Goodwin. These people have resources. They've planned for every contingency. You need to back down. Can't do that. Then God help you. He hung up. I reported to Wolfe, who absorbed the information without visible reaction. Clever. They've created legal cover for Mr. Sullivan's presence, which means they're planning to use him if necessary, but only as a last resort. They're still hoping we'll capitulate. And if we don't, then at midnight, we'll discover whether they're willing to commit murder in front of multiple police witnesses. I suspect not. The Kings have survived 15 years by being smart, not reckless. Public assassination would bring too much heat. Unless they're desperate enough. Desperation leads to mistakes. We're counting on that. At 10:15, the telephone rang again. This time it was Saul. I met with Rafferty. It took some convincing, but he's agreed to the deal. 5,000, immunity, safe passage. In exchange, he'll provide everything he knows about the waterfront operations and identify one member of the Crown Council. Wolfe leaned forward. Which member? Her name is Catherine Vance. She's 52, former Army intelligence officer, now runs a legitimate consulting business as cover. According to Rafferty, she handles all the King's intelligence operations, surveillance, blackmail, information gathering. She's one of 3 leaders. The other 2 are her brothers, Robert Vance and James Vance. The office was silent except for the ticking clock. Brothers and sister, Wolfe said quietly. The Crown is a family. Literally, continue, Mr. Panzer. Catherine is the strategist. Robert handles enforcement. He's former military police, trained in tactical operations. James handles finances. He's a CPA, used to work for a major accounting firm before the war. Together they built the Kings from nothing. Started with a handful of dock workers in 1938, expanded systematically, recruited carefully, and created the organization you're investigating now. Where are they located? Rafferty doesn't know their personal addresses. That information is compartmentalized. But he knows where they meet. A private office in a building on 53rd Street. Top floor, access by appointment only. He's been there twice in 10 years, both times to receive major operational directives. Can he identify the building? Better than that, he can get us inside. The building has security, but Rafferty has legitimate reasons to visit. He makes quarterly financial reports. If he schedules an emergency meeting, claims there's a problem with the waterfront operations, Catherine Vance will see him, and we'll accompany him. That's the plan. But Mr. Wolfe, these are dangerous people. Catherine Vance ordered at least 12 murders that Rafferty knows about. Her brothers are equally ruthless. If this goes wrong, it won't go wrong. Not if we plan carefully. Wolfe checked his watch. It's 10:20. The deadline is midnight. Here's what will happen. At 11:30, you and Archie will meet Mr. Rafferty at the building on 53rd Street. He'll request an emergency meeting. When Catherine Vance agrees to see him, you'll enter together. Archie will record the conversation. I trust you're equipped. Always. Excellent. Once we have Catherine Vance on record discussing the King's operations, we'll have leverage. The Crown will fall, not through violence, but through exposure. The King's power rests on secrecy. We're going to destroy that secrecy.
And the siege? I asked. The cars outside? The sniper?
Will become irrelevant once we have evidence. The Kings can't kill us without confirming everything we're alleging. It would be suicide. They'll realize that when we present them with a choice, disband voluntarily or be exposed publicly. Either way, their organization ends tonight. It was classic Wolfe. Transform a defensive position into an offensive maneuver, turn a siege into an opportunity, and leverage information into victory. Brilliant and potentially fatal in equal measure. One problem, I said. I'm supposed to be watching the brownstone. If I leave, we're undermanned. Mr. Brennan will cover your position. Fritz is armed. I gave him a pistol 3 years ago, after an incident he's too polite to mention. The dogs are sufficient deterrent for any direct assault, and Inspector Kramer's patrol cars are within 2 blocks. We'll be adequately defended for 90 minutes. And if the Kings attack anyway, then they'll discover that this brownstone is harder to breach than they imagine. But they won't attack. Not until after midnight. They've set a deadline, and organizations like the Kings honor their own rules. It's part of their discipline. He looked at Saul through the phone. Mr. Panzer, confirm the meeting for 11:30. Archie, prepare recording equipment. We have 1 hour and 10 minutes. Use it efficiently. At 11 o'clock I left the brownstone through the service entrance, moving quickly through the rear courtyard and into the alley that ran behind the adjacent building. Brennan watched my departure from an upstairs window, ready to secure the door the moment I was clear. The alley was dark, narrow, and smelled like garbage and regret. I moved through it with the Marley drawn, checking shadows, listening for footsteps. The King's cars were out front. Their sniper was on a roof facing the brownstone. But they might have positioned someone in the alleys. Smart money would have. I made it to 10th Avenue without incident, caught a cab heading north, and arrived at 53rd Street at 11:20. Saul was waiting on the corner, looking like he belonged there, one of his many talents. Rafferty's inside, Saul said quietly. He called Catherine Vance 10 minutes ago. Emergency meeting. She agreed to see him at 11:35. We've got 15 minutes. Recording equipment. He patted his jacket. Wired and ready. But Goodwin, this is risky. If Catherine Vance suspects anything, she won't. She thinks she's meeting with a loyal lieutenant who's panicking about a waterfront problem. We're just associates providing backup. And if she recognizes us from the surveillance, then we improvise. It's what we do. We entered the building at 11:30. It was nicer than I'd expected. Marble lobby, brass fixtures, an elevator operator who looked like he'd been there since the building opened in 19... Rafferty was waiting by the elevator, looking nervous but controlled. He was mid-40s, lean and weathered, with the kind of face that had seen action and survived. When he saw us, his expression tightened, but he didn't back away. "Mr. Rafferty," I said, "ready? As I'll ever be. But understand something. If Catherine suspects I'm betraying the Kings, she'll have me killed. Probably before we leave the building, possibly before we leave her office. These people don't take betrayal lightly. Then we'll make sure she doesn't suspect." "What's the cover story?" "Waterfront problem. We've got a shipment coming in tomorrow night. European electronics, high value. But I've received intelligence that the feds are watching. I need guidance on whether to proceed or abort. Simple. Believable. Good." We rode the elevator to the top floor, the 6th. The operator didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just delivered us and departed. The hallway was empty. One door at the end, unmarked, with a buzzer beside it. Rafferty pressed the buzzer. Once, a woman's voice came through a speaker. "Mr. Rafferty, you're early." "My apologies, Miss Vance. The situation required immediate attention." "And your associates?" "Security. Given the sensitivity of the situation, I thought it prudent." A pause. Then, "Come in." The door clicked open, and we entered what might have been the most normal-looking office I'd ever seen. Desk, filing cabinets, comfortable chairs, good lighting, windows overlooking 53rd Street, a coffee service on a side table, everything professional, legitimate, utterly unremarkable, except for the woman behind the desk. Catherine Vance was 52, as Saul had said, but she looked younger. Dark hair with strategic silver, sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, a suit that probably cost more than my car. She could have been a lawyer, a banker, a corporate executive. Nothing about her suggested she ran a criminal empire that had terrorized Hell's Kitchen for 15 years. "Mr. Rafferty," she said, her voice smooth and utterly without warmth. "Sit. Explain." Rafferty sat. Saul and I remained standing, positioned to either side of the door. I could feel the recording equipment in my jacket, a small weight that represented the difference between success and catastrophe. "We have a problem," Rafferty began. "Tomorrow night's shipment, the one from Rotterdam. I've received intelligence that federal agents are surveilling the warehouse. They may have informants inside the operation." Catherine's expression didn't change. "Source of intelligence?" "A contact at customs. Reliable. He's been paid for 3 years, never missed a warning." "And your recommendation?" "Abort. Move the shipment to the backup location. Delay by 48 hours. Allow the federal surveillance to move on." She was silent for a long moment, studying Rafferty with the focused attention of a chess master, evaluating a board. Then, "Who are these men?" "Associates. Protection, in case the feds followed me." "I don't recognize them." "New recruits, recommended by Victor Stroll before his retirement." Another pause, longer this time, and I realized with a cold certainty that she knew. Maybe not the details, maybe not our identities, but she knew something was wrong. You didn't run an organization like the Kings for 15 years without developing instincts about betrayal. "Mr. Rafferty," she said quietly, "I'm disappointed." And then everything happened at once. Catherine Vance's hand moved toward her desk drawer with the kind of casual precision that suggested she'd done this before. I had the Marley out before her fingers reached it, and Saul had moved to block the door. "I wouldn't," I said. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to talk." "Then you've made a fatal error. No one talks to the Crown without permission. And Mr. Rafferty," she looked at him with something approaching sadness, "after 10 years of loyal service, you betray us for what? Money? Immunity? Some misguided notion of justice?" "For freedom," Rafferty said quietly. I'm tired, Catherine. Tired of the violence, tired of the fear, tired of watching you and your brothers destroy people for profit. We've made you wealthy. You've made me complicit. There's a difference. She leaned back in her chair, and I noticed she'd abandoned any attempt to reach the drawer. Smart. She was calculating odds, and the odds weren't in her favor. Who are you? She asked, looking at me. Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. Ah, the advertisement. The crown will fall. Dramatic. But premature. She folded her hands on her desk. You're recording this conversation, I assume. We are. Then you're expecting me to confess, to admit to running a criminal organization, to verify your theories. She smiled, thin and cold. Mr. Goodwin, I'm a licensed business consultant. I provide strategic advice to legitimate enterprises. Whatever Mr. Rafferty has told you is fiction. Whatever evidence you think you have is circumstantial. And whatever you're recording right now is a conversation with a businesswoman who's being threatened by armed men in her office. She was good. Better than good. In 30 seconds, she'd reframed the entire situation, turned herself into the victim, and made us the aggressors. If this recording ever reached a courtroom, she'd have reasonable doubt built in from the first word. But she'd also made one critical error. She'd confirmed we were recording, which meant she cared about what was being recorded, which meant there was something to hide. You're right, I said. This recording won't convict you, but it doesn't have to. It just has to prove you exist, that the crown isn't a myth, that Catherine Vance meets with King's lieutenants in a private office on 53rd Street. That's enough to start official investigations, federal investigations, the kind that involve subpoenas, audits, and surveillance that doesn't end until someone goes to jail. Investigations require evidence. We have evidence. Vincent Ramirez's ledger, 15 years of financial records documenting protection payments, money laundering, and murder. Your organization's entire operations meticulously documented by your own bookkeeper. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear. Catherine Vance didn't scare easily, but recognition. Vincent is dead. But his ledger isn't, and neither is Dennis Halbert, who has a photographic memory and can testify to everything in that ledger. And neither is Thomas Brennan, the undercover cop who infiltrated your organization 12 years ago and remembers names, faces, and operations. And neither is Frank Delacroix, Maria DeMarco, Otto Kellner, and a dozen other business owners who are ready to testify about protection payments. They'll never testify. They're too frightened. They were. But fear has an interesting quality. It evaporates when the thing you're afraid of is exposed. Your organization survives on invisibility. We're taking that away. By tomorrow morning, every newspaper in New York will know about the Vance family, about Catherine, Robert, and James, about how 3 siblings built a criminal empire in Hell's Kitchen, about how you've corrupted police officers, judges, prosecutors, about how you've murdered anyone who resisted. She was silent for a long moment. Then, my brothers are waiting downstairs, 2 armed men each. If I don't call them in 5 minutes, they'll come up. And when they do, you'll die. All 3 of you. Possibly, but Inspector Kramer has 4 patrol cars within 2 blocks of this building. If shooting starts, they'll respond. Your brothers will be arrested. You'll be arrested, and the Kings will be finished. Or you'll die, and the investigation will collapse. Too late for that. Wolfe has copies of everything. He sent documents to lawyers, reporters, federal agents. If anything happens to us, those documents become public. You can kill us, Miss Vance, but you can't stop what we've started. It was a bluff. Partially. Wolfe had copies of the ledger, certainly, but the rest, the distribution to lawyers and reporters, that was improvisation, the kind you do when you're staring at a woman who's ordered a dozen murders and trying to convince her that killing you would be counterproductive. She studied me with those sharp eyes, calculating. Then she picked up her telephone and dialed. Robert, stand down. Yes, I'm certain. No, everything's fine. I'll explain later. She hung up. You have 10 minutes to leave this building. After that, my brothers will be less accommodating than I am. We need something from you first. You've received more than you deserve simply by leaving alive. We need confirmation, on record, that you and your brothers run the Kings of Keller Block. That's all. 5 seconds of honesty, and we walk away. And if I refuse, Then we stay here until the police arrive, and you explain why you're meeting with a King's lieutenant in a private office at midnight, while your detective is under siege at his brownstone. She was silent for perhaps 15 seconds. Then, very well. For the record, Mr. Goodwin, yes, my brothers and I created the Kings of Keller Block. We built it from nothing. We organized it. We discipline it. We control it. We've provided order to a neighborhood that had none. We've protected businesses from actual criminals. And we've done so with intelligence, planning, and perfect operational security for 15 years. You may think you've won by exposing us, but you've simply proven that the system we built was necessary. Someone had to control Hell's Kitchen. We chose to be that someone. History will judge whether we were right. It wasn't a confession, not legally, but it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement combined with Vincent Ramirez's ledger and testimony from multiple witnesses would be enough. Thank you, I said. We're leaving now. But Miss Vance, Wolfe wants you to know something. He doesn't care about your philosophy. He doesn't care about your justifications. You murdered Horace Zimmerman because he refused to pay protection money. That was personal, and Nero Wolfe always settles personal debts. Then he's a fool. Personal vendettas get people killed. Or they get organizations destroyed. Time will tell which. We left. Rafferty first, then Saul, then me, walking backward with the Marley still drawn until we reached the elevator. The ride down was silent, except for Rafferty's ragged breathing. That was insane, he said when we reached the lobby. She could have killed us all. But she didn't, because she's smart enough to know that killing us would confirm everything we're alleging. I checked my watch. 11:53. We've got 7 minutes until midnight. Let's get back to the brownstone. We made it back by 11:58. The siege was still in place. 5 cars now instead of 6, the sniper still on his roof. But something had changed. You could feel it in the air, a kind of tension that suggested decisions were being made elsewhere. I entered through the service entrance. Brennan secured the door behind me, while the dogs swarmed, checking, confirming, accepting. Caesar gave me a thorough sniffing, apparently decided I'd survived intact, and returned to his post. Wolfe was in the office, reading. He looked up as I entered. Report. I played him the recording, Catherine Vance's voice, clear and undeniable, confirming what we'd suspected. The Crown was 3 people, the Vance siblings, who'd built and controlled the Kings for 15 years. Wolfe listened without expression. When it finished, he set down his beer glass. Fritz had brought fresh beer at 11:45, right on schedule, and nodded. Satisfactory. We now have documentary evidence, witness testimony, and recorded admission. That's sufficient for federal prosecution. The Kings are finished. They're still outside. Not for long. It's midnight. Their deadline has passed. Now we see if they're rational or emotional. At exactly midnight, the telephone rang. The smooth voice again, but this time with an edge I hadn't heard before. You've won this round, Mr. Goodwin, Catherine called. She said you have evidence, testimony, a recording. We do. And you'll take that to the federal prosecutors. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York will receive Vincent Ramirez's ledger, sworn statements from multiple witnesses, and an audio recording of Catherine Vance, confirming the Crown's existence and structure. By tomorrow afternoon, there will be federal indictments. By tomorrow evening, there will be arrests. Unless we stop you. You can't stop us. We have copies, backups. If anything happens to us, everything becomes public. You've lost. The only question now is whether you lose quietly or loudly. A long pause. Then, what's the alternative? Wolfe wants to meet with all 3 of you. Tomorrow, noon, his office. You'll come unarmed, unaccompanied, and prepared to negotiate the terms of your surrender. Surrender? Your organization is over, but how it ends is negotiable. You can disappear, leave New York, leave the country if necessary, or you can face trial and spend the rest of your lives in prison. Wolfe doesn't particularly care which, but he insists that the Kings of Keller Block cease operations immediately. All protection payments stop. All enforcement activities stop. All members disband and return to legitimate employment. And if we refuse, then we go to the prosecutors at 9 a.m., and you spend tomorrow afternoon being arrested on federal charges. Murder, extortion, racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering. The US attorney will ask for no bail, and given your resources and the evidence against you, they'll get it. You'll die in prison. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear breathing on the other end, someone thinking hard about impossible choices. Tomorrow, noon, we'll be there. But Mr. Goodwin, if this is a trap, if there are police waiting, if this is some scheme to arrest us, you'll regret it. No police, no traps, just negotiation. Wolfe keeps his word. We'll see. The line went dead. Within 5 minutes the cars began leaving. One by one, engines starting, vehicles departing, until West 35th Street was empty except for normal traffic. The sniper on the roof across the street packed up his rifle, descended through the building, and walked away into the night. The siege was over. Fritz appeared with sandwiches and coffee, because apparently surviving mortal danger made him think people needed food. Brennan collapsed into a chair, looking exhausted and relieved in equal measure. Halbert emerged from upstairs, pale but steady. Saul called to confirm he'd made it home safely. And Wolfe sat in his office, reading his history of Montenegro, as if the past 6 hours had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience between dinner and bedtime. Well, I said, accepting coffee from Fritz, we did it. We exposed the crown. We ended the siege. We survived. We've done nothing yet, Wolfe corrected. We've simply forced them to negotiate. Tomorrow's meeting will determine whether they choose exile or prosecution. Either way, the Kings will cease operations, but the actual work begins tomorrow. What work? Ensuring the Vance siblings honor their agreement, coordinating with federal prosecutors, providing testimony and evidence, protecting our witnesses until trials conclude. He turned a page. Justice is not a single event, Archie. It's a process. We've completed the investigation. Now comes the tedious part, ensuring the results stick.
Tedious?
Right, because negotiating with murderers is tedious. Compared to being shot at by snipers, yes, considerably more tedious. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm reading about the Battle of Malkovich, which is far more interesting than anything that happened tonight. I left him to his reading and went upstairs to my room, where I discovered I was too wired to sleep despite being exhausted. So I sat by the window, watching the empty street, thinking about orchid growers who'd burned alive and accountants who'd died in the Hudson River, and how 15 years of criminal empire could be dismantled by one stubborn detective and 6 well-trained dogs. Tomorrow at noon, the Vance siblings would arrive. We'd negotiate terms. They'd probably accept exile. It was the rational choice, and Catherine Vance was nothing if not rational. The Kings of Keller Block would dissolve. Hell's Kitchen would breathe easier, and Nero Wolfe would return to his orchids, satisfied that justice had been served. It wasn't perfect. Some guilty people would escape prosecution. Some victims would never see their tormentors punished, but it was better than nothing. And sometimes, in this work, better than nothing is the best you can hope for. I eventually slept around 3 a.m. with Caesar on the floor beside my bed and the Marley 38 on the nightstand. Old habits die hard. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if October had decided to give Manhattan one last gift before surrendering to November. I was up at 7, making coffee and checking the street from every angle. Empty. Normal. No siege cars. No snipers. No burning effigies. Just another Saturday in New York. If you ignored the fact that 3 leaders of a criminal empire would be arriving at our door in 5 hours. Fritz was in the kitchen by 7:30, preparing what he called appropriate refreshments for the meeting. I didn't ask what made refreshments appropriate for negotiating with murderers. Knowing Fritz, it probably involved perfect coffee and pastries that would make the Vance siblings regret their life choices. Wolfe descended at 9, consumed his breakfast, and spent the next hour reviewing Vincent Ramirez's ledger one final time. He'd marked perhaps 30 pages with colored strips of paper, red for murders, blue for major financial transactions, green for corruption, yellow for operations that involved all 3 Vance siblings. They'll deny everything, I said, watching him work. Of course, denial is reflexive for people in their position, but denial becomes exhausting when confronted with comprehensive evidence. We have 15 years of documentation, multiple witnesses, and Catherine Vance's own recorded admission. They'll realize quickly that fighting is futile. And then? Then we offer them the choice, exile or prison. Rational people choose exile. The Vance siblings have survived 15 years by being rational. They'll choose correctly. And if they don't? Then at 1 o'clock we deliver everything to the U.S. attorney and let federal prosecutors handle it. Either way, the Kings cease operations today. He closed the ledger. Now, let's discuss positioning. Where will they sit? We spent the next hour arranging the office, like a stage set. Wolfe behind his desk, commanding the room. Me at my desk, positioned to see everyone and take notes. 3 chairs arranged in front of Wolfe's desk. The red leather chair for Catherine, the 2 yellow ones for her brothers. The dogs would be present but controlled, stationed throughout the brownstone to monitor exits and entrances. At 10:30, Saul called to report that Hugh Rafferty was safely in a hotel under an assumed name with a security detail Saul had personally vetted. The $5,000 had been paid. Rafferty was prepared to testify if needed. At 11, Inspector Kramer called, ostensibly to check on our continued survival, but actually to express his profound skepticism about our plan. "You're negotiating with the King's leadership." His tone suggested he thought we'd lost our minds. "Wolfe, they're going to kill you." "They're going to negotiate," Wolfe corrected. "Violence is counterproductive at this stage. They know we have evidence. They know federal prosecution is inevitable if they refuse our terms. They'll be rational. And if they're not, then you'll have probable cause to arrest them when they attempt violence in front of multiple witnesses. I've taken the precaution of installing a secondary recording system in the office. Everything said this afternoon will be documented."
You're recording them without their knowledge?
New York is a one-party consent state, Inspector. As long as one participant knows about the recording, it's legal. I'm a participant. I know, therefore legal. Kramer made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the craziest. I can't decide which. I'm neither. I'm simply thorough. Now if you'll excuse me, I have guests arriving shortly." At 11:45, Fritz came to the office. "The table is prepared. Coffee, tea, and Linzer tarts, neutral choices, nothing too elaborate. I've also prepared sandwiches in case the meeting extends past lunch." "You're planning for a long negotiation?" I asked. "I'm planning for every possibility, Archie. That's what professionals do." At 11:58, the doorbell rang. The dogs reacted immediately. Caesar rose from his position near the door. Mars flanked him, and Diana, Apollo, Minerva, and Loyal all shifted into alert positions. Not aggressive, Wolfe had been clear about that, but watchful, ready. I checked the peephole. 3 people stood on the stoop. Catherine Vance, looking exactly as she had last night, composed, professional, dangerous, and 2 men who had to be her brothers. Robert Vance was early 50s, tall and solid, with the bearing of someone who'd spent years in uniform. Military police, Rafferty had said. It showed in his posture, his expression, the way his eyes swept the street before focusing on the door. James Vance was slightly younger, softer around the edges, wearing a suit that cost more than my monthly salary. The accountant, the financial architect of a criminal empire that grossed nearly $1 million annually. All 3 were unarmed, as far as I could see. No obvious weapons, no backup visible on the street. They'd come as requested, alone, unaccompanied, and apparently willing to negotiate. I opened the door. "Miss Vance, gentlemen, please come in." They entered, and the dog's reaction was fascinating. Caesar approached first, giving each of them the thorough sniffing that represented his security protocol. Catherine remained perfectly still, allowing the inspection. Robert's hand twitched toward his hip, old habit from carrying a gun, but he caught himself. James looked uncomfortable but controlled it. Caesar completed his inspection, looked at me, and made a sound low in his throat that meant, "These people are dangerous. Watch them." "Impressive animals," Catherine said. "Dobermans and a pit bull. Military trained?" "House trained," I corrected, "with some additional skills. This way, please." I led them to the office, where Wolfe had positioned himself behind his desk, like a judge preparing for trial. He didn't stand as they entered. Wolfe never stood for guests unless protocol absolutely demanded it, but he did incline his head slightly. "Miss Vance, gentlemen, please sit. Fritz will serve refreshments momentarily." They sat, Catherine in the red leather chair, her brothers flanking her in the yellow ones. The arrangement wasn't accidental. Wolfe wanted Catherine front and center. She was the strategist, the intelligence chief, the one who'd make decisions. The brothers were important but secondary. Fritz appeared with coffee, tea, and a tray of Linzer tarts that smelled like heaven and probably tasted better. He served everyone with perfect courtesy, departed, and closed the door behind him. The dogs had redistributed themselves, Caesar and Mars at the door, blocking exit, Diana and Apollo in the hallway, covering approaches, Minerva on the stairs, preventing access to the upper floors, and Loyal at the front window, maintaining his self-appointed watch. Wolfe picked up his beer. Fritz had brought a bottle at precisely noon and took a long drink. Then he set it down and fixed the Vance siblings with a stare that had broken stronger people. "Let's begin with facts," he said. 15 years ago, the three of you created the Kings of Keller Block. You recruited carefully, organized systematically, and built a criminal enterprise that has generated approximately $15 million in revenue through protection rackets, smuggling operations, money laundering, and labor racketeering. You've maintained operational security through compartmentalization, ruthless enforcement, and systematic corruption of law enforcement. You've ordered or authorized approximately 47 murders, including Vincent Ramirez, Horace Zimmerman, and Philip Russo. You've terrorized an entire neighborhood while simultaneously providing a veneer of legitimacy through your public business interests. Is any of this inaccurate? Catherine's expression didn't change. You have our attention, Mr. Wolfe. What do you want? Justice, accountability, the immediate dissolution of your organization. And in exchange? You avoid federal prosecution. You leave New York. You live out your remaining years somewhere far from here, preferably somewhere that lacks extradition treaties. The alternative is prison until death, which, given your ages and the severity of the charges, seems virtually certain. Robert Vance spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the clipped authority of someone accustomed to giving orders. You have evidence. Comprehensive evidence. Wolfe gestured to Vincent Ramirez's ledger. 15 years of financial records, documented by your own bookkeeper. Names, dates, amounts, operations. Additionally, we have testimony from Hugh Rafferty, Thomas Brennan, Dennis Halbert, and multiple business owners who've paid protection money. We have recordings of conversations, including last night's meeting with Miss Vance. And we have the cooperation of federal prosecutors who are quite eager to dismantle your organization. Rafferty betrayed us. Robert's voice dropped to something dangerous. Mr. Rafferty chose survival over loyalty. A rational choice, given the alternatives. He's currently in protective custody with sufficient evidence to ensure his testimony reaches trial. Harming him would only confirm your guilt. James Vance leaned forward slightly. You mentioned exile. Define the terms. Simple. You disband the Kings immediately. All protection payments cease. All enforcement activities stop. All members are informed that the organization no longer exists. You liquidate your assets in New York, transfer the money to accounts in your chosen destination, and leave the country within 30 days. You never return. You never reconstitute the organization elsewhere. You live quietly, unobtrusively, and far from American jurisdiction. And, if we refuse, then at 1 o'clock, 58 minutes from now, Archie will deliver this ledger, along with supporting documentation and witness statements, to the U.S. Attorney's Office. By 3 o'clock, there will be federal indictments. By 5 o'clock, there will be arrest warrants. By this evening, the three of you will be in federal custody, and by Monday morning, you'll be arraigned on charges that carry mandatory life sentences. The office was silent, except for the ticking clock on the wall and Caesar's steady breathing near the door. Catherine studied Wolfe with those sharp eyes, calculating odds, evaluating options. Then, you're asking us to abandon 15 years of work, to surrender an organization we built from nothing, to accept exile over fighting. I'm offering you life over prison. Choose wisely. We could kill you, right here. All three of us are trained. We're unarmed, yes, but Mr. Wolfe, you're quite large and presumably slow. Your assistant is armed but outnumbered. We could eliminate you both, destroy your evidence, and return to business as usual. Wolfe's smile was thin and utterly without humor. You could try, but you'd fail. Archie is considerably faster than he appears. The dogs are trained to respond to violence with overwhelming force, and I've taken precautions. Wolfe's expression darkened. So the man who murdered Horace Zimmerman is beyond prosecution. Apparently, does that change your offer? No, but it makes me considerably less sympathetic to your situation. 49 minutes, Miss Vance. Choose. What about him? I want acknowledgement, on record, that you ordered his murder, that Felix Gunther carried it out, that it was deliberate, calculated and unjustifiable. Why? Gunther's dead. We're accepting exile. What does acknowledgement accomplish? Wolfe's voice dropped to something colder than I'd ever heard. It accomplishes honesty. For 15 years, Horace Zimmerman's death has been listed as accidental. His family, his friends, his colleagues, they all believed it was faulty wiring. I want the truth acknowledged. For them, for him, for the historical record. Catherine was silent for a long moment. Then yes, we ordered Horace Zimmerman's death. Robert authorized it. I planned the operational details, and Felix Gunther executed it. He refused to pay protection. We made an example. It was murder. We don't apologize for it. We did what we thought necessary, but we acknowledge it. Is that sufficient? Yes. Then we have an agreement. Wolfe checked his watch. 42 minutes remaining. James, you'll contact your financial institutions and begin liquidation. Catherine, you'll contact your lieutenants and announce the dissolution. Robert, you'll oversee the transition and ensure no violence occurs during the disbanding. Archie will monitor your communications to ensure compliance. Any deviation from these terms, and the evidence goes to federal prosecutors immediately. Clear? All three Vance siblings nodded. Then we're finished. You may use the telephone in the front room to make your calls. Archie will supervise. Good day. The next 3 hours were a masterclass in organizational dissolution. Catherine called 12 people, lieutenants, captains, and what I assumed were members of the council who'd remained invisible throughout the investigation. Each conversation was brief, professional, and final. The Kings are dissolved, effective immediately. Return to civilian life. No retaliation, no continuation. It's over. James made financial calls, speaking in the coded language of accountants moving large sums through complex channels. Within 2 hours, he'd initiated the liquidation of assets worth somewhere north of $5 million, the accumulated wealth of 15 years of criminal enterprise. Robert coordinated with cell lieutenants, ensuring a smooth transition. No violence, no panic, no attempts at resistance. He'd been a military police officer, and it showed in the precision of his instructions. By 3 o'clock, it was done. The Kings of Keller Block had ceased to exist. Inspector Kramer arrived at 3:30. Having heard rumors that something significant had occurred, he found Wolfe in the office, reading his history of Montenegro as if dissolving a criminal empire was just another Saturday afternoon. What happened? Kramer demanded. The Kings disbanded. The Vance siblings will leave the country within 60 days. Hell's Kitchen is free of their influence. Justice has been served. You let them go. I gave them a choice, exile or prosecution. They chose rationally. The alternative would have been lengthy trials, expensive legal battles, and potential acquittals if witnesses became unavailable. This way, the organization dies, the neighborhood recovers, and the guilty parties spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders. Kramer looked like he wanted to argue, realized he had no ground to stand on, and shook his head. You're a piece of work, Wolfe. Absolutely maddening, but effective. I'll give you that. I consider that a compliment. It wasn't meant as one. By evening, the word had spread through Hell's Kitchen. The Kings were gone. Protection payments had stopped. Enforcement had ceased. The shadow government that had controlled 6 square blocks for 15 years had simply evaporated. Frank Delacroix called to confirm he wouldn't need to testify. Maria DeMarco sent flowers, a strange gesture but heartfelt. Otto Kellner stopped by with a bottle of wine and tears in his eyes. The neighborhood was breathing easier. Saul reported that Hugh Rafferty had left New York for Chicago, where he planned to start over. Thomas Brennan decided to stay in Manhattan, but he'd stopped drinking and started attending veterans meetings. Dennis Halbert returned to his accounting practice, armed with a story he'd probably never tell. And Nero Wolfe returned to his orchids. I found him in the plant rooms at 6 o'clock, tending to his cattleyas with the focused attention he'd denied everything else for the past week. The plants were blooming magnificently, completely unaware that their caretaker had just dismantled a criminal empire in their name. Horace would have appreciated this, Wolfe said without looking up from his pruning. He understood that civilization requires maintenance. You can't simply plant seeds and expect them to flourish. You have to tend them, protect them, remove the threats that would destroy them. We removed a pretty big threat. We removed one threat. There will be others. There always are. But for now, Hell's Kitchen can recover. The businesses can operate without fear. The families can breathe without looking over their shoulders. That's worth something. It's worth a lot. Even if the Vance siblings escaped prosecution. They escaped prison. They didn't escape justice. They'll spend the rest of their lives in exile, unable to return home, unable to rebuild what they lost, unable to operate without fear of being discovered. That's a form of punishment. He moved to another orchid, examined it critically. Besides, Archie, I'm not interested in punishment for its own sake. I'm interested in results. The Kings are gone. That's the result I wanted. And Horace Zimmerman has been avenged. Catherine Vance acknowledged his murder. That acknowledgement is recorded. His family will receive copies, anonymously, through appropriate channels. They'll finally know the truth about how he died. It's not much, but it's something. We stood there in the plant rooms for another 15 minutes, surrounded by orchids and the quiet satisfaction of a job completed. Then Fritz called us down for dinner. Roast beef, Yorkshire pudding and a salad that actually tasted good, and we ate like normal people who hadn't just spent a week fighting a war. The dogs joined us in the dining room, having been rewarded with extra portions of beef, and the knowledge that they'd protected the brownstone successfully. Caesar accepted his portion with dignity. Mars ate like it might be his last meal. Diana, Apollo and Minerva took turns between eating and patrolling. And Loyal, smallest but somehow most satisfied, curled up near Wolfe's chair and promptly fell asleep. After dinner, I found Wolfe in the office, making notes for the memoir the Vance siblings would provide. Historical documentation, he called it. Evidence of how a criminal organization could flourish for 15 years in plain sight. You really think they'll provide it? I asked. They will. They're intelligent enough to understand that breaking our agreement would be catastrophic. Besides, people like the Vance siblings have a peculiar pride in their accomplishments. They'll want the record to show what they built, even if that record remains sealed in my safe. And if they don't leave the country? Then we deliver the evidence to federal prosecutors and proceed with prosecution. But they'll leave. Catherine Vance is too rational to do otherwise. He was right, of course. Wolfe was usually right, which was maddening but reliable. The Vance siblings left New York 43 days later. Destination unknown. The Kings never reformed. Hell's Kitchen slowly recovered. And Nero Wolfe returned to his orchids, his beer and his books, satisfied that justice, his peculiar brand of it, had been served. Some cases end with arrests and trials and justice in its most formal sense. This one ended with exile, acknowledgement, and a neighborhood finally free of fear. Not perfect, but better than nothing. And sometimes, in this work, better than nothing is exactly what you hope for.